Hey there, internet friends, and welcome to That D Plus Show. Class is in session for the only show from that nerdy site that lets you know what kind of quality to expect right from the name. I'm your host, Trevor Starkey, and each week we dive into a different Disney Plus offering and discuss its history, how it holds up today, and our general impressions of the thing. This show is made possible entirely by the support of our patrons over at patreon.com/thatnerdysite. So if you like the show and you can support us over there, we would definitely appreciate it. But if you can't, no big deal. The fact that you're listening is awesome. And of course, we would love it if you like, subscribe, rate, review, and share the podcast with your friends. Today, we are once again continuing our Summer of Star Wars. Today with the arguably most divisive of the Star Wars saga in The Last Jedi. So Cameron, are you locked and loaded with your intro? Great. Frank Bazzani is joining us. How you doing, Frank?
I'm doing good. Happy to be here.
Excellent. I wanted to give you the shot just in case you and Cam came up with like the first lead in, since I know that that's happened like once or twice where he said a thing and that was going to be your thing. We're also joined. Yeah. Oh, you're good.
That's true. Yeah, no, that's true. But I just, this was funny because this is one that I just like didn't come up with one on. I was too stuck with the movie.
That's fair. We're also joined by Logan Wilkinson. How you doing, Logan?
I'm doing good.
All right, excellent. And now that I've given Cameron enough time to definitely be prepared for it, he should be absolutely ready to go when I throw to Cameron Abbott and say, Cameron Abbott, how are you doing today?
The greatest teacher failure is.
Indeed.
Oh, that's a good line. Yeah, I'll allow it.
We are what they...
And apt in this case.
Yes.
We are what they grow beyond.
Yeah, there you go. So yes, we are talking all about The Last Jedi today. Before we dive into the history and stuff, I just kind of want to get the general vibe of where this conversation is going to end up going today. So what's kind of everybody's like overarching like thoughts on Last Jedi? I mean, I'll kick it off first. This is one of, if not my favorite in the saga at this point. I like just a lot of the choices that are made with it, and I like it. I think from a visual standpoint, I love a lot of the moments that it has. It has some of my absolute favorite moments across the series. And it's not the kind of thing like I will not defend everything. Like I have since they've ever been unveiled. I think I've hated porgs. And there are some definitely moments around that I'm not a fan of, but I just really enjoy a lot of what's going on in this movie. Even like what people often like dismiss as like the Canto Blight stuff. I like the side of the galaxy it shows us that we don't often see in these or in the Clone Wars or in kind of other stories in the Star Wars universe. So I am super pro Last Jedi, but I also oftentimes understand where people are frustrated and how it doesn't make choices that people wanted it to make or something like that. Cameron, how about you?
Man, Trevor knows my journey with this film.
Mm-hmm.
This has been...
We've spent many a Portillo's lunch talking about it.
Yeah, just like we have Trevor and I have definitely in the past at like previous lunches, like for like probably a good couple hours, just like parsed out that film piece by piece to figure out just like, okay, like where, like, and like really where my problem is, because when I came out of it, I was just like man, like I feel like hurt, like I feel weirdly hurt and like upset over this film, and I love Rian Johnson, and I love the idea of deconstructing Star Wars and a lot of this stuff, but I'm coming out of it like really upset, and I don't know like where that exactly is coming from, and I'm saying some stuff that I've read online and listened to other people. And Trevor is rightfully calling me out, saying, well, you don't actually think that because you just said this or that. And it was really this like great, like these great conversations about like, okay, this film as a whole, where do I land on it? And after rewatching it, I watched it today. I had like the time to watch it today. And I have to say that this is some of my favorite Star Wars, and also like some of my absolute least favorite Star Wars is in this film. Yeah. I am. This film did to me what Snoke says killing Han Solo did to Kylo Ren. It divided me in half to the bone. Like, this film divides me in half to the bone because there's so much that I love. Like, there's so many parts, and we'll get into it when we talk about what we really loved about this film. But then there are other parts where I look at it and I think to myself, there are a couple of things here that, like, like I understand like where people like are coming from, where they like things. I actually have my phone over here. I have notes about some stuff that I immediately took away from it after watching it. And I think that probably one of the biggest points of, I wouldn't say contention, but like what can for long time like super nerdy Star Wars fans, like uber nerds like myself, in regards to the galaxy far, far away, will tell you is this film can be kind of categorized as this. So this is the first Star Wars film that ever had paper in it.
Mm-hmm. I pulled in that as a trivia point specifically because you had mentioned a few weeks back of like there isn't books and there isn't reading or whatever, like there isn't that in Star Wars. There isn't paper.
There's no paper in Star Wars. There's no writing implements in Star Wars. And so what, like those books existing in this movie do one of two things. One, they break a cardinal rule of the suspension of disbelief for the idea of Star Wars and it being like this sci-fi futuristic galaxy, but at the same time, it also gives a credence and reference to...
Not futuristic.
Sorry,
galaxy.
Not futuristic. I apologize.
Always a long time ago in a galaxy.
Always a long time ago, galaxy far, far away. Because that's how space is observed, which is still like an awesome thing that he came up with a long time ago. But it breaks the cardinal rule in this way of it does like take away that element of it, but it also adds the weight of what is here, which is 1,000 generations. If you think of a generation somewhere between 20 to 50 years, 1,000 of those is, and he's using a rough guesstimate, so it could be more or slightly less, who's to say, but it's such a monumental thing for that to be in here. And so I look at it as like, there's a part of me that's like, okay, this is actually broken a fundamental tenet in a part of my mind. But at the same time, it adds a gravitas to it that I think was completely missing from other films, that the other films don't have this. And in that way, I look at it like that's very much how I can kind of summarize where I come down on this film. Like, there's awesome, really cool ideas and stuff in this film. And then there's also parts of it that, because what it's deconstructing, it's not necessarily leaving in a better place than it found it, as far as like quality goes, in my opinion. So...
Okay.
Like,
I don't know if it's actually recording or if it's not recording at all. I can't really tell. Maybe it's going.
We'll get to you in a second, Logan, because you and I already spent like 2 hours this week talking about The Last Jedi. But Frank, tell me what your thoughts on this are.
Yeah. So I think I'm definitely a little bit less hot on it than you, and probably maybe a little bit more towards Cam. I don't dislike the movie. It's not like I hate the movie or anything like that. Like, it's still a good movie and it's still like a pretty fun Star Wars movie at the end of the day. But there is a lot of things, like kind of even like I think some things that have already been kind of hinted at where like I think there's just some weird choices, and like I think there's also just some things that like the movie is just like boring to me in some parts in a way that I don't like, and in a way that like it reminds me of, and this is a harsh thing, so maybe, but it kind of reminds me of like we're coming off the prequels. Like there's totally whole sections that are just boring, and it doesn't hit that caliber of like badness, and that's why like this still stands way above something like that in terms of like the Star Wars universe. But I still think there's just whole points of this where there's like boring sections. There's points where I'm like, why is this happening, or why is this person doing this? Like I wish they would have been doing this, or this. I still kind of like one of the things we touched on. I know we'll get deeper into it, but I don't like that they break everybody up in such like a far kind of way, especially after like the great chemistry they have. I don't mind them taking like Rey and having her go off with Kylo, and that's kind of like a great thing that I think they did in this movie. But I think everybody else gets kind of like split up in a way that I don't like necessarily love, and we could have had so much more fun and so much more fun moments that we didn't really get. But I do agree that like I think the cinematography and some of the shots and everything are like absolutely beautiful in this movie. And I do think there is a lot of like really awesome moments as well. So it's definitely not all bad. But I think I'm just kind of a little bit more from the first time I watched it, and even this, I think I'm a little bit just kind of like lukewarm, just kind of in the middle on it, you know?
All right. Yeah. For video viewers, Logan froze, so has dropped off, which is why all of the framing on all of us is messed up, and I apologize. Hopefully when he hops back on, that will get resolved. Yeah, while we wait for kind of his response, I want to touch on a couple of the items that you guys have brought up there. Like one of the things I like about, especially, it's definitely not something I thought about like the first handful of times that I watched it, but like after you mentioned hey, there's no paper in Star Wars, and I watched it again this time, I thought to myself, oh, so that must be like super old if like it is so far back that they were using paper instead of like these screens and stuff, especially because if you go into like, you know, the Star Wars like Knights of the Old Republic stuff, even 10,000 years ago or whatever it was, they weren't using paper for these kinds of things. So it definitely was something of like, oh, that does add like a weird layer of history to this that like is like, I don't know how many people register in the way that you do, Cameron, that like paper isn't
not
a
many.
thing
I know. I know
in the Star Wars
world,
but it is like a subtle thing then that like that might stand out. Like if people do think about it and think, oh, like, oh yeah, I guess books aren't a thing I've seen in the Star Wars universe. Paper isn't a thing I've seen in the Star Wars universe. Nope. That's kind of a pretty cool little thing that's going on there for it. And then in terms of kind of what you were talking about there, Frank, like there, the idea of like the cast being broken up, we talked about a little bit in like Empire Strikes Back when Luke gets pulled away from Han and Leia, same kind of vibe. And it's definitely noticeable here again, because in this one we have Rey doing her own story, and we have Finn doing his own thing with Rose, and then Poe doing his own thing. But like there's so it's like, yeah, they are torn apart, and that sucks because I would love to see these actors like all together. But then like at the end of the movie, Poe and Rey like introduce themselves to one another. It's like, oh, that's right, they actually haven't really met or spent like they cross paths at the base at the end of the end of the first movie, I'm sure. But like
the person who would introduce them was in a coma. Shipped off in a coma for this film.
Yeah. Well, and like with her, like I'm definitely in the terms of this movie, I'm fine with like her going off and having this own like kind of Jedi sub adventure with Kylo, and I think that's actually like the strongest part of the entire movie for me is just kind of like I like Kylo a lot. He's like my favorite character from the sequel trilogy. Like some of what they did with him here, and like I think they bounce off each other in a lot of interesting ways. But I just think I think the mistake to me where it's like when you break up Finn and Poe, and I understand that like Poe has his own journey he needs to go on here, and they have the things they want to explore here, and so does Finn. But all the stuff with Finn, I think, is like super weak, and I don't think just Poe being there would have fixed it. But I think if Poe was there, and if it was more of this like buddy cop action movie between the two of them going on this like adventure to the casino gambling planet, and they could have done so much more with that in terms of them getting into trouble and getting like arrested and all the things that happen. Like it could have been so much more fun and impactful. But then I feel like it's just like, well, here's Rose. And I just don't like Rose that much. And the actor's fine. I know she got a lot of hate, which I don't think she deserved at all. But I just think it's totally like, here's a character that I made up that is going to go off with Finn and do his own thing now. And I just kind of wish like they have such great chemistry that like I just wish it could. There's this whole other movie that they could have had in my mind. Yeah. But that's just my kind of my point there.
I want to point out here, Kelly Marie Tran is an absolute saint. She is an incredible human being, a beautiful and wonderful actress who did not ever with the slightest iota deserve any of the garbage that she received from a supposed great fan base like the Star Wars fan base. The levels of and it also points to John Boyega as well. The levels of bigotry that these actors of color have had to go through in regards to it is tremendously, like, extremely upsetting and disappointing. But also, like, Rose is a good character. I have my problems with the way, like, I am in agreement with you, Frank. I think that Poe and Finn being split up after just reuniting to give us these 3 planes of action. Once again, Star Wars suffers when you get into 3 planes of action. But like, yeah, you are giving us a brand new character, and then, there's so much selling. There's so much that Rose has to sell as a character in these moments that I think, like, Kelly Marie Tran as an actress nails. Like, her performance is on point, powerful, conveys this message of like we are a hopeless group trying to dig around and find hope within ourselves, and she does a great job of that. I just don't think the film around her and John Boyega in this part of the movie lends itself to like doesn't help them in any means, especially when it's such like a slow parts of the movie. Like their part is such a slow part of the film that it definitely hurts the to remember, oh yeah, isn't there like this really important interstellar chase going on that is actually there's actually kind of like the actual bridge that connects everything in this film. Isn't this the main like story setting of this thing happening, and everything else is happening around it as side story, but we are spending so much time like where this is part of like why this film kind of like starts to break apart in a lot of different ways for me, and that is like, yeah, that's a part of the issues. But I love Rose as a character. I love Kelly Marie Tran as an actress, and I wanted to make a statement here to say, if you are part of the fandom that ever sent any mean messages to Daisy Ridley on Instagram that made her leave Instagram, to Kelly Marie Tran, to John Boyega, I would like to politely ask you to stop listening to our podcast, unsubscribe to everything you're related to with us, and you know what? I would say don't let the door hit you, but I really hope the door hits you on your ass on the way out.
All right, fair enough. Touche.
So, I didn't expect to get that heated over it.
I mean, it's like, I know we're all on the same page of like, she didn't deserve any of that shit, and yeah, like the toxic parts of the fandom are the worst kinds of people, and like I loathe how much and how loud that audience is. Especially just given like all the other shit we see in gaming or in entertainment and all that stuff. So it's incredibly disappointing. So I thank you for, voicing the sentiment. Because I just take it as like I take it for granted that we of course all think that. So it's not something I would even necessarily think to be like, hey, let's also kind of stop the podcast to say like Kelly Marie Tran didn't deserve any of that shit. But, I appreciate that. Logan, you are back with us now. And again, as I said, you and I have already spoken at length about Last Jedi, but what's your kind of relationship with it, especially kind of going from your first viewing where you had a very strong response to this most recent viewing?
Yeah, I mean, first off, I'll touch on to Cameron's point as well, more broadly, to even just say that I think for me, so much of the conversation around The Last Jedi and Rise of Skywalker, and in some extent the sequel trilogy at large, is a conversation around these different elements of the Star Wars fandom and Star Wars community, both positive aspects of the community and also really toxic parts of it. And I think, Trevor alluded to it earlier, right? Like, I think there can be no conversation around The Last Jedi without acknowledging the fact that, like, this is a movie that in some ways really fractured the Star Wars community. And I think even more so because for myself and for Cameron and for Frank, who I think are range from the movie's good to we don't like it to kind of everything between. Trevor obviously is the most positive about it. So many of the, I feel like, negative reactions for The Last Jedi are so seemingly visceral almost, right? And I think for me, it's important to note that, Daisy Ridley and John Boyega and Oscar Isaacs and Kelly Marie Tran and all the people in Star Wars, you know what I mean? Whether it's those for any of the larger cast. And this goes back to a point I made about the prequels too, that I've made repeatedly. George Lucas too, who's not even involved in this, but just everyone involved in Star Wars, they didn't ruin your childhood and they didn't ruin your life. They made a movie, and if you don't like that, that's totally legitimate. That's totally fair to not like the film they made. But they didn't ruin anything in your life by making that thing, right? And I say that as someone, and Cam can agree with me on this, as a massive Star Wars fan, as someone who loves this series so much from like some of my earliest memories. The worst thing in all of Star Wars that I've ever seen, which we'll get to next week, still doesn't diminish my love of Star Wars at all, right? Like, these things that you don't like, whether it's the prequels or whether it's The Last Jedi or whether it's, Rise of Skywalker or anything in between, they don't ruin the thing. If you don't like it, you don't like it, and that's okay. And there's never a valid reason at any point in time to either, verbally assault someone and attack someone online for a performance they give in a role, whether the performance is good or bad, is totally irrelevant. And even more so when you're attacking them for the color of their skin or the sexuality or their gender or anything else, right? There's never a good reason to do that. And so much of the conversation on these last two films, I feel like have so much toxicity coursing through them. So I just wanted to say that right at the gate too, that all of us here at That Nerdy obviously stand away and want to, condemn that. And that was sort of my big takeaway watching Last Jedi again, is I feel so little from the movie, right? And I literally told this Trevor, like, halfway through the movie, I was like, I don't get either side of the argument, right? Like, I don't think Last Jedi is a terrible trash movie, and I also don't think it's a great movie, right? Like, I think Last Jedi is a totally in-between movie. Like, it to me is like the definition of like, this movie is totally fine. Like, it's like it is such a picture perfect, like, that is a 7.5 movie if I ever saw one, kind of thing, right? Like, I think it's totally fine. I think it's good. There are parts of it that I don't like, obviously, and we'll get into that. But I think the difference between when I watched this movie when it came out, to your point, Trevor, versus now, is that I've seen really bad Star Wars things that I don't like, right?
You know where the story goes from here.
Yeah. Like, I think for me, an element of it is sort of what's done in Last Jedi is done in good faith, right? I think it's done with the total desire to do something different, right? Like, Rian Johnson wants to deconstruct the Star Wars mythology and the characters and everything involved in that, and I think inevitably in that there are parts that are going to work and there are parts that aren't going to work in that kind of deconstruction of the Star Wars saga and mythology, especially with like the huge ideas and characters he's tackling. But I think it's all done from a place of genuine affection for the characters and the story and the series. I don't think that's going to be the case in Episode 9. And again, for all the flaws of the prequel trilogy, I think George Lucas was telling the story that George Lucas wanted to tell, and I think that was done in good faith too, right? Like, there are a lot of mistakes in the prequels, but like, they're never like trying to appease, I think, toxic elements of community, right? So like, I also will say that, right? Like, I think, as I told Trevor, I like about half of Luke Skywalker in this movie, right? Like, and to me, Luke Skywalker is sort of the central crux of what I do and don't like about the film. And I think I like the idea of Luke Skywalker as a legend in this movie a lot, and I don't like the idea of Luke Skywalker as a person in this movie. I think
it's like the definition of don't meet your heroes, isn't it?
Yeah, like, I think that the Canto Blight stuff I've always thought was fine. I've never really had an issue with that. Like, I've never really, like, it's like fine. Like, it's like I don't have any issue with it. I like Trevor said, the idea of like going into the different part of the galaxy and exploring that, and I'm always here for a good, like, maybe we need to like check capitalism a little bit conversation, and like maybe we should like
maybe eat the rich,
war profiteering.
Eat the rich.
Yeah,
Eat
so,
the
like,
rich is a great message.
I'm totally okay with
nobody
all that
on this
stuff, right?
Nobody on this podcast is against eating the rich. Let's make that very clear.
And so
we are all for eating the rich.
Yeah, and so I'm here for all of that, right? Like, I think the movie is long, and I think the movie can feel long at times, especially I think the first and second act, I think, are probably the weakest, and I think the last act of the movie is probably the strongest by quite a bit. But I mean, I think on the whole, I came away with less maybe strong reactions than I thought I might. I think there are elements of this that I really love, right? Like, spoiler alert, I love Luke and Yoda's scene. It's probably my favorite moment in the entire movie. I think it works so well, right? And like I told Trevor 2 days ago when we had our like 2.5 hour conversation about this before we recorded a different podcast, go listen to News You Care About. Yeah, like, I think the thing that I'm coming to realize about the sequel trilogy is that what makes it so interesting is it has that ability to tackle the history that Star Wars has left now, right? Like, it's the first time where like they can mess with that, right? And I think it works really well in the Force Awakens movie. And I think the best and worst parts of Last Jedi to me are how it deals with history and how it handles history and mythology and legends, right? And I think that'll again will be very present in Rise of Skywalker. I just think it'll basically be all bad by that point, right? Like I think it just kind of steadily gets less effective for me. But I think
no future spoilers. No future spoilers.
no future spoilers.
We've been doing
Last Jedi,
future spoilers like since day one of this podcast. So like,
Rise of Skywalker sucks, but like I think that for Last Jedi, I think that it's moments that it does with Luke and Yoda and like the Jedi story mythology, I think are really, really powerful because A, you didn't know Yoda was going to be in the movie. B, it is such like that's the ultimate person you can bring in at that point that'll deliver that kind of a heavy punch. And
it was a puppet. It wasn't CGI. He wasn't flipping around all over the place.
And it works so well, right? Like it is this larger commentary on, I think, Star Wars as a whole, right? And these like figures we looked up to, and I think there's so much potential in the ideas of Last Jedi, and while they don't all work, I think I applaud the fact that Rian Johnson did something that was really ambitious, and really different and really out there, and did something that he knew that people weren't going to like as well, right? And like I sort of don't like, right? But we sort of need that at times, and so yeah, like Last Jedi is never going to be my favorite Star Wars movie. Like I think it is probably going to be pretty decidedly my second favorite sequel movie forever. I don't think it's ever really going to go higher or lower than that. But I also think that's a good place for what this movie is kind of trying to do, right? Like it is essentially trying to like really deconstruct everything in Star Wars, and that's kind of neat to watch its successes and failures in that.
Cool. All right. We will come back to some of our favorite moments after I go through all the rigmarole of all the other history stuff and all our other little segments here. So diving into the history lesson here, this was originally released December 15th, 2017, which was a notable shift from the previous 3-year cycle between saga movies. For the sequel trilogy, they moved to a 2-year cycle, and that's not even counting the non-saga movies that were happening in the off years. Other notable releases of the time, you had Blade Runner 2049 came out October 6th of this year.
The movie's great.
Indeed. Thor Ragnarok came out November 3rd, which means Cameron, Logan, and I were in Maryland sometime around November 3rd because we all went and saw Thor Ragnarok before Extra Life that year.
That is still the best Marvel movie.
It is.
I would argue against
wow!
Arguments.
It is.
I didn't realize that was your favorite Marvel movie.
It's one of my favorite movies of all time. Thor Ragnarok.
I didn't
it's
realize
so
that
up there as one of my favorite movies of all time.
It is
like Logan,
fun.
I've never laughed
It's
like that in a
great.
movie before.
It's great, yeah.
It is
Like-
a real fun one.
Yeah.
Lady Bird came out also on November 3rd, which was
Oh,
I didn't end up seeing it until
That was a great
2018?
end of the year.
I saw it. I saw it like early in January. So because I remember when I saw it, I was like, oh, if I had seen this last year, it would have been my favorite movie of 2017. Instead, Baby Driver took the title and fuck Ansel Elgort and Kevin Spacey. Murder on the Orient Express, that has come up once or
That's a
twice
great
on
movie.
the show, came
That's
out
yeah.
November 10th.
Great adaptation.
The
Great
Justice
adaptation.
League came out November 17th, which I
I
did
don't know
not
what that
realize.
is. I only know
Sorry.
Zack Snyder's The Justice League.
The Justice League, as people
Justice
are now
League.
referring it to it. It's weird because in the film releases on Wikipedia, it is now they've updated basically the Justice League entry to say it's directed by Zack Snyder, and Joss Whedon is not on that entry anymore. So I was like, wait, what? Okay, so it was a very fun little thing. On the Disney side of things, we had Coco came out November 22nd.
This is a great November for films,
Right?
Holy
Yeah.
shit. So, yeah.
The Shape of Water, that year's Best Picture winner, came out
God,
December
yeah.
1st.
Yes. Fishfucker the movie.
And then on December 20th,
I love that.
basically as the follow-up for after this one, Jumanji: Welcome to the Jungle and The Greatest Showman came out December 20th. Both of those notably, we're in I want to say we're in the top 5 or top 10 movies way longer than Last Jedi, because Last Jedi blew up at the beginning and then faded out, whereas those two stayed in the top running for I think well into January or February even. They had very good long tails. Those two did.
Well, I mean, Jumanji was like everybody's like a reboot to Jumanji, and then it turned out to be like just a really good, great, solid film.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have The Greatest Showman, which is a propaganda film about one of the worst people to ever exist in show business.
Indeed. But it had catchy songs and people like Hugh Jackman.
White people, what do you like? What else do you need? It's every like. Oh, I won't get into that. Sorry, I have an entire tirade I can give on The Greatest Showman that is not meant for this podcast whatsoever.
It is.
So.
I mean, it can be. So I talked about this when I did the blank check episode with the friends over at 61 Indie, Kyle and Mike. Like at some point we talked about The Greatest Showman. I don't remember why. But it is like it's on Disney Plus now. It got acquired in the Fox merger and stuff. So we might do a future episode of it just to spite Cameron.
I mean, not to spite me. I will gladly come on there and explain
I've
why
never seen it.
that
I've never seen
film
Greatest
is
Showman.
bad, why its existence is not a good thing, and the fact that it is a emblematic of the very problematic nature of theater. I'll get into that. No worries.
But the music was from the people who did La La Land, so you know.
I do love La La Land.
That's a whole other thing.
The director, as we've
Do we not like
touched
La La
on
Land on the
already,
podcast? What just happened here?
Oh no! I love La La Land, but there's a conversation around La La Land as like in regards to in the same vein as The Greatest Showman. Like there is a through line between those two films that is emblematic of something that I will be more than happy to get into in the future, but not for this podcast because this is about The Last Jedi.
Cool.
What a tease! What a tease! Yeah.
Rian Johnson, as we've touched on, director prior to this, had worked on the films Brick, The Brothers Bloom. Looper was the first one I certainly remember like hearing about. I never actually saw it, but I remember seeing it because that was
his first big one.
Yeah,
that was
right.
his first big break.
But I really he started popping out to me because he directed two of the most iconic episodes of Breaking Bad in The Fly and Ozymandias, as well as a third episode, 51, that was basically Walt's 51st birthday. So yeah, that was where I remembered hearing and seeing the name from, and I love both The Fly and Ozymandias are among my favorites of Breaking Bad. So
I think Ozymandias is the definitive best episode of Breaking Bad.
Oh yeah, Ozymandias pretty much tops everybody's Breaking Bad episode lists, and then The Fly, much like Last Jedi, is incredibly divisive. People really love it or people really hate it. And I fall much like this one on the camp of I really like it. After The Last Jedi, he would go on to do Knives Out, and then he is also, of course, signed on to direct two sequels for Knives Out 2 and 3, whatever they end up being called. And we've already seen some casting rumors popping out of that, but more.
It's Daniel Craig with a Bayou accent. Just
exactly, more Daniel Craig, Benoit Blanc episodes in that series. He also, of course, was the writer for this one, and his writing credits prior to this included Brick, The Brothers Bloom, and Looper, as he was basically the writer and director of those. He would go on to write Knives Out, as well as the future Knives Out sequels, and he's still penned in for an untitled Star Wars trilogy down the line. Logan and I touched on this when we talked the other day, compared to the Benioff and Weiss of Game of Thrones. When Game of Thrones crashed and burned, they seemingly lost their chance at doing a trilogy, but the executives over at Disney and Star Wars seem to still appreciate Rian Johnson's work enough to keep that in the running. Who knows when we'll actually get those, but especially
give that guy a full. Yeah, sorry about that. I didn't mean to keep interrupting you, Trevor.
You're good.
I was just gonna say, just give that guy a full trilogy. Let's see what he can do with a full trilogy deconstructing Star Wars. Let's go. Let's give it.
I'll be very interested.
I don't think he would though. I don't think his trilogy would be a deconstruction of because this is the deconstruction of Star Wars. Yeah, if she were the characters he has at his disposal, this would be the time to do it. I think he would just do something really interesting. Yeah, with a trilogy.
I'll be curious, what era it ends up being set in. Are they gonna? Is he gonna go back to the High Republic to kind of line up with the books and stuff that are coming out there, or will it be just in a completely untouched landscape. Who knows? Starring, we have a handful of new people, but we do have returning Mark Hamill, who we've touched on in the past, as well as Carrie Fisher, Adam Driver as Kylo Ren, Daisy Ridley as Rey, John Boyega as Finn, Oscar Isaac as Poe Dameron, Andy Serkis returning as Supreme Leader Snoke, Lupita Nyong'o in a brief little bit there as Maz Kanata, Domhnall Gleeson as General Hux, Anthony Daniels C-3PO, Gwendolyn Christie returning as Captain Phasma. Then we have, as we touched on earlier, the introduction of Kelly Marie Tran as Rose Tycho, who prior to this had done a number of college humor sketches.
She's great.
She would go on to be in the, I believe it's a Hulu series, Sorry for Your Loss.
I think it's a Facebook series.
Oh, that's right. Yes. Yeah, it was a Facebook Live series. I think you can now watch it on Hulu. And then most notably recently, she was Raya and the Last Dragon. She has also continued to come back to the role of Rose in many of the the extended, the animated stuff. Like she was when Frank and I did the episode on the holiday special, the Lego holiday special last year. She popped up in that. So shout out to her, despite all the crap she got, being more than game to come back and continue playing that role. Laura Dern in the role of Vice Admiral Holdo. Of course, Ellie Statler from Jurassic Park. She's also in October Sky, which is a movie I remember seeing as a kid and really enjoying.
It's one of my. It's an Abbott family one of our staple films as a family is October Sky.
Nice. That's a great Logan, just for you, do you remember who she played in The West Wing?
I was just thinking, the name is going to be a piss take, but yeah, she's
I don't have the name.
Wing.
I just have her. I have the role she played, basically.
Yeah, the minute I saw it, I was like, yeah, she is in The West Wing, isn't she? That's gonna be the thing. I don't think she is a congressperson or a senator or anything like that.
Will it help if I remind you that Toby was very smitten with her?
Yes, she is she's gonna be the Nobel laureate kind of thing. The
poet laureate. Yes, the U.S. Poet Laureate in the episode of the same name.
Oh, that's such a great episode. Toby's
we did an episode. We did a podcast about
Toby's such a doofus in that episode because he's so smitten with her. Oh my gosh, it's a good one.
Yep,
that's a great episode.
After this, she would go on to be. I mean, she's been in many things over the years. She is Laura Dern. She is one of those very epitome of a character actors out there. But since Last Jedi, she went on and was in Big Little Lies, as well as Marriage Story and Little Women.
That's right. She's in Marriage Story.
Yeah.
I should watch Little Women.
I mean, both of them incredibly good movies. Yes, I highly recommend both of them, and she's great in both of them.
She's the lawyer in Marriage Story, right?
Yeah, she is. Scarlett Johansson's
Scarlett
lawyer.
Johansson's lawyer.
Yep. And she has one great scene in particular, and then anything else she's in, it's a standout. But she basically got the Oscar nomination for one scene in particular. And I don't remember if she ended up winning that year, but she was phenomenal in it. Then last of the new big batch of people, we have Benicio del Toro in the role of DJ, who I really like that role. I really like Benicio him, and I really like the character that he's playing. And I would have been I am very curious to learn more about that character in the world of Star Wars, be it in some kind of extended thing or whatever. But he prior to this,
his character's weird and bullshit. I hate it.
I mean, that's fine. We can talk about that a little bit. The Usual Suspects, Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, and Snatch and Traffic and Sin City. Sin City is probably the first one I actually remember seeing him in. As Jackie Boy, and then he has been the Collector in the MCU since Thor: The Dark World, and then he was most recently, or not most recently, but after this, one of the things he has been in recently was Dora and the Lost City of Gold,
which was weird,
playing the voice of the monkey, which I don't know Dora. Was it Swiper, no
Boots.
Swipey or whatever?
Boots is Boots. Yeah. Swiper is the fox that tries to swipe.
Okay.
Boots is the monkey that wears red boots.
Okay, I think he's Swiper then. So I think he's the fox then.
I will just come in here with an update and say Laura Dern did win the Oscar for Marriage Story.
There you go. She deserved it.
Yeah, absolutely.
There you go. I'm pulling up Benicio del Toro while we're at it. Yeah, he was Swiper. So
I was like, I don't remember him being Boots. Boots was just a monkey.
I don't know. I don't like. I just assumed Swiper was the monkey that I've seen in those things.
As a follow-up,
as an uncle to many children, I have seen a lot of Dora over the years.
Dora's great.
My second oldest niece, Rachel, massive fan of Dora the Explorer, intensely massive fan of Dora the Explorer. Yeah. I have seen every episode of Dora the Explorer in syndication.
All right.
I will say this is a follow-up too. The Dora the Explorer movie is actually pretty good.
Weirdly good.
Myself and Shravia had a lot of fun watching it. It's a very fun movie.
It's a fun family flick. It's a fun family flick for sure.
Yeah, I don't remember which of you. I remember having that conversation. Oh yeah, no, it was you, Logan. We did an episode of that Nerdy Site show where you talked about it. I was like, because it was like that, and then like the trashy TV shows that you were watching at that point. I was like, all right, this is certainly a thing we're talking about. Okay,
it was good. Yeah.
Outside of that core cast, we of course have as I've been doing these last few episodes, a handful of like the little cameo level types of things. Of course, as we touched on, Frank Oz returning as Yoda, Joonas Suotamo playing Chewbacca in the first time without Peter Mayhew in the role, Billy Lord getting a little bit more of an expanded role as Lieutenant Connix, aka Carrie Fisher's daughter there, Justin Theroux in a weird like appearance as the Master Codebreaker with the red pomme blanc or whatever, the pomfloon, whatever it is, Warwick Davis making yet another appearance in the series here as a character named Wodabin, who is one of the random people at Canto Blate. He has like a whole extra little backstory on Wikipedia. But one of the things I did not realize until reading the Wikipedia article on this is every other role that Warwick Davis has been playing across the saga, from Wicket all the way through this, and then I believe he makes one more appearance in Rise of Skywalker. Everyone starts with a W.
Yep.
Yeah, it's a fun little Easter egg that they've been doing with him. Joseph Gordon-Levitt has a little vocal cameo as one of the Rebel pilots named Slow and Low, named after the Beastie Boys song. And Gareth Edwards, the future director, the director of Rogue One, makes a cameo as one of the trench soldiers in one of the Resistance trench soldiers in the Battle of Crate. All right, trivia time. They have a bad feeling about this. Anybody know who says it?
I have no idea in this film, actually.
It is a trick question. It is not actually said out loud, but it has been confirmed by Rian Johnson that the anxious beeps that BB-8 has at the beginning with Poe are BB-8 saying, "I have a bad feeling about this."
I was about to say, because I do not recall it ever being said.
It is yet another like deconstruction of Star Wars that like
you know what?
In there, but it's kind of not in there.
No, but that would make sense because if he says that and then Poe goes, "Hey buddy, happy beeps only, happy beeps."
Yeah, and Leia even's like, I agree with the droid. Yeah. There is also
that actually weirdly fits because like. That I like that because BB-8 deserves that starting line.
It's one of those. I remember when I went and saw it like a second time opening weekend. I went in being like, I don't remember where the line was, and so I went in kind of the second time looking for it, and I was like, oh, I bet they're doing a little subtle thing there where like that's what BB-8 is beeping, and sure enough, that's what came out after the fact.
Funny enough, fun trivia fact for this podcast: I almost used "Happy Beeps Only, buddy, Happy Beeps" as my intro.
There you go. Additionally, if that doesn't vibe with you, there is in one of the like foreign language dubs. When Leia has her like Han was Han was Han about it or something like that. Whatever that line is, it gets retranslated to Han had a bad feeling about this. So she does kind of still say it in a different like foreign language version of the film. Yes.
I wonder if the person who translated that was like, hey, he didn't put this in there, and then changed the line to include that, and they were like a huge Star Wars fan.
Yeah. In the galactic timeline of things, as we touched on a little bit last week, this basically picks up right after The Force Awakens, so it is also taking place in 34 ABY, after the Battle of Yavin. Other notable things that were going on in this time period, while the Resistance is escaping at the beginning of the movie, Leia is also sending off the Inferno Squad to the Outer Rim territories to find allies, as covered in the story campaign, I believe, of Star Wars Battlefront 2. And then the Battle of Batuu takes place 6 months after the Hosnian Cataclysm, aka the First Order blowing up all the planets in the last movie. And this is where the First Order occupies Black Spire Outpost, aka Galaxy's Edge at Disneyland. So the Star Wars Disneyland, or Star Wars Land at Disneyland, takes place canonically in between episodes 8 and 9. I
did not know that it had a place on the timeline, but that's actually pretty cool.
Yeah, it is. It's, I mean, at least in its current iteration, it is permanently set between 8 and 9. And that's why you'll see, you know, new era characters like Kylo Ren show up, and why it doesn't like seem weird when that character shows up after what happens in 9 and stuff.
That's pretty rad, actually. I like that.
Yeah. I originally didn't want to pull this in here, but then I was like, well, I know it's something that I've talked about with Logan in the past as well as you, Cam, I think. And because it is the like number one upvoted thing it's
the thing everyone
IMDb
talks
trivia.
about.
Yeah. After reading the script for the film, Mark Hamill told writer-director Rian Johnson, quote, "I pretty much fundamentally disagree with every choice you've made for this character, Luke Skywalker. Now, having said that, I've gotten it off my chest, and my job is to take what you've created and do my best to realize your vision." End quote. Despite the ultimately divisive response among audiences and critics alike following the film's release, Hamill later said in a statement that he had maintained respect for Johnson as well as Episode 7 and 9 director J.J. Abrams. Daisy Ridley and John Boyega have both talked about in interviews how their initial reaction after reading the script for the first time was trying to get in contact with Johnson as soon as possible because they couldn't wrap their head around the direction he was going. And I did pull in specifically 3,234 out of 3,299 people found that interesting on IMDb's trivia. The next one down, because they rank it in like order of most votes, was like 1,200 or something like that. So it was like this got almost 3 times as many like yes votes as anything else. After completing the arduous 600-foot climb on Ireland's Skellig Michael Island, Mark Hamill had hoped that he could avoid having to repeat the trek for additional scenes if he could somehow remain on the summit overnight, thus forfeiting the luxury of room service at his hotel. He suggested sleeping in a tent and, quote, staying in character. However, after some inquiries were made with the Irish authorities, he was told by producer Kathleen Kennedy that he was not permitted to pitch a tent because the location is a protected UNESCO World Heritage Site. Echoing a couple of trivia facts we've brought up in the past, when filming, Laura Dern said "pew" every time she shot her blaster. Although not audible, one such instance even made it into the finished film. It can be noticed in the close-up shot when Holdo is stunning her opponents around an hour and a half into the film. According to director Rian Johnson, the Porgs were the result of puffins being native to Skellig Michael, the island where the Octo scenes were filmed. They were unable to move them as they are protected species, and it would have been too time-consuming and expensive to edit them out of the shots. So Rian decided to create a new indigenous species and simply CGI over the puffins. So while I do loathe the puffins, I do appreciate that it is a very creative like way around the real life situation they were dealing with.
That's one of the main reasons I love the Porgs, is because it's just, we can't do anything about it, so let's use them. Mm-hmm. And you make this adorable, stupid creature with it, which is fantastic, especially when they look at Chewbacca while he's eating one of them. So good. Yeah. So good.
But
or they honestly, almost like shoot themselves with a lightsaber.
That's awesome. I like the Porgs. They're great. I think they're great. They're less annoying rabbits, I guess. Like, they're just...
Oh, I'm sure when I make it actually out to Star Wars Land, I'll buy a stuffed Porg just because I'm an idiot like that. But Frank, you were going to say something?
I'm totally with you that it's like a creative solution around something that they were obviously stuck with and didn't really have another way out of. But would any of us care if the puffins were just in the movie? Like the actual real life puffins on Earth? Like, would any, like if Porgs never existed, they were just in the background, would anyone be sitting here and going, but there's puffins in the background? They wouldn't be on this space planet in like, I don't love the porgs, and I agree with you. It's a creative solution, but it's something I have wondered since this movie came out was like, would anyone have even ever said anything? All right, I guess Cam is saying he would have.
Me, I would, because it's important to note that it's like they weren't just in the background. Like puffins are everywhere on that island, everywhere. You can't get around it. They're in the forefront, background, everywhere, flying in the background, the whole shebang. And also, I would instinctively go, "Those are puffins. What is this bullshit?"
Yes,
like I had to sit through a childhood of George Lucas's shitty CGI giraffe
noted
elephant.
Ornithologist Cameron Abbott would have immediately been able to identify the puffins and be like,
I
"Wait,
can tell a puffin.
that's not an alien bird. That's a real world bird." Boo, boo.
Yeah, I would have walked out and demanded my money back and been like, Rian Johnson is the worst Star Wars director of all time because of this.
There you go. After the breakthrough CGI that was displayed in Rogue One, a Star Wars story the year prior, for recreating long gone actors, the filmmakers of this film saw fit to issue statements ahead of release, shutting down any speculation or worries on the possibility that such technology would be used for the late Carrie Fisher. In short,
spoiler, it is just in the next movie, but whatever.
It's. Yeah. In short, all of her scenes, barring the stunts, are categorically hers, including the dialogue. Yeah, this is something, and along with this next one, this was Carrie Fisher's final film where she was directly involved. She died in December 2016, and this film was dedicated to her memory. This is something that Logan and I talked a little bit about at length. Is that I wonder how differently this film would be viewed if it weren't like if I mean, like years from now when people don't know that Carrie Fisher passed away in between 7 and 8, how will people view her scenes in this movie?
Wait, she passed away between 7 and 8? I thought she passed away after after 8 was over.
Yeah, no, I'm saying like
filming done,
in real life. Yes,
yet. Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah.
7 came out.
Gotcha.
7 came out in 2015. She finished all her filming, all her scenes and stuff from 8. Passed away in December of 2016, around the time Rogue One came out, and then this movie came out a year later. So one of the things that Logan and I talked about was the idea that, and a number of people have brought this up, but like those of us that went in knowing that Carrie Fisher had really passed away assumed she was going to be written out of the movie or something. And so when the bridge gets blown up and she goes flying out into space, there's like this innate thought of, oh, okay, that's how they're going to write her out. Okay. And and you kind of prepare yourself for it. And then when that's not how that story was actually intended to end, and she comes back in and the rest of the film plays out, like that real life knowledge of Carrie Fisher's passing ends up influencing our expectations on the movie in a very weird world way.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Makes sense. I usually just my problem with that scene has nothing to do with the fact that she's doing anything. It's that they just we'll get into it later.
We'll get into that scene for sure. Don't worry.
But yeah, no.
Okay. Luke Skywalker bears some resemblance to Obi-Wan Kenobi's appearance in the original Star Wars trilogy. In fact, Mark Hamill reprised his role in 2015 at the age of 63, while Alec Guinness was 61 when he was first cast as Obi-Wan Kenobi. Kelly Marie Tran did not tell anyone she was doing the movie and lied that she was doing an indie film in Canada. At one point, she got some maple syrup to bring back to her parents so they would believe she was actually in Canada. You are
She's a saint.
You are a treasure, Kelly Marie Tran.
She is a saint, and I won't hear otherwise.
At 2 hours and 32 minutes, this is the longest Star Wars film to date.
Yes.
According to Rian Johnson, Luke Skywalker's rationale for exiling himself on the island was that the Jedi were not helping and were instead perpetuating the cycle of the Jedi and Sith. They needed to go away so a new light could rise from a more worthy source, which Logan is giving the thumbs down to, which is pretty much why I brought that bit of trivia in there. I gave you one in the whole Mark Hamill didn't want to play this role, and I gave me one in the here's why Ron Johnson thinks that makes sense. And I brought this one in while we were talking about it earlier, but Rian Johnson did bring Frank Oz into the editing room for guidance about editing scenes with the puppet, with Yoda. Then, as I touched on earlier, this was the first movie without Peter Mayhew as Chewbacca. Mayhew played him for a final time in The Force Awakens, as we touched on last week, and then retired from the role due to his poor health. He passed away in 2019. Joonas Suotamo had already played Chewbacca's body double in The Force Awakens and took over from Mayhew on the subsequent films. And lastly, this was the first mention of books in the Star Wars franchise, going back to your point earlier, Cameron.
Yep.
So that is what I've got there for some trivia. So we kind of touched on some of this already about like what do we think of the film in general, but how does it hold up here? I guess in particular, how does it hold up following Rise of Skywalker and knowing where the saga ends?
Much better.
Frank, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, man, especially in that context, I think it's interesting to go back to this one because I think the whole sequel trilogy, especially going back in hindsight, is just hurt by the Rise of Skywalker, especially because once you know like where everything goes, like I think Force Awakens set up all these interesting ideas, and then this throws a lot of that out the window and tries to do kind of some of its own things and some of its own interesting ideas. And then even the setups that this leaves or the continuations, then Rise of Skywalker is like, yeah, but forget about all that. Like, let's go back and let's like worry about some of this let's just kind of redo some things. And that's when so I think like it's weird where I know the movie always had problems anyways, but I think like retroactively knowing that some of the things that even happen in this movie just kind of like there's just things that just don't go nowhere or don't go anywhere or don't have the payoff that like could have even made this movie even stronger in hindsight. And I think, but obviously, like I said, I think that's not just a thing about this movie. I think that's the whole sequel trilogy as like a whole, like, and especially we rewatching them finally with the context of knowing where it goes. Because I remember walking out of this one and there's all these, it was very divisive. Like you said, there's a lot of conversations, but as far as I remember it being like, but in 9, they'll get us back. Like they're going to come through and they're going to close some of these loops or they'll do something. And so
well, everybody was like, we really liked Force Awakens. We really liked what JJ did with that. So let's hope he, brings it home. Forgetting that JJ Abrams doesn't really do a great job of ending things.
No, and that's completely true. And I don't think he did a great job of ending it. I think he even introduces new things for no reason. But we'll get there when we get there.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, that's why, like, I think in retrospect, like, I think this movie has parts of it that originally were fine that are now, like, weaker because of just where we know where things go. But on the other hand, like, there's still a lot of moments I like about the movie. Like I said, I do like a lot of the stuff they do with Kylo Ren in the movie, or even just I always like just seeing him on screen. And whenever he fights, like he's so angry, he's so heavy,
Mm-hmm.
like all that just comes across on screen in like a way you don't get in like the prequels, when everything's so fake.
Plus we get shirtless Kylo.
Oh God. Yeah. Yeah. That was one that I'm like, I'm fine with it. And it became a meme and everything. But that's another one where I'm like, if it wasn't in the movie, would anybody say anything?
Yeah.
Was anybody demanding like giant peck Kylo?
Yeah.
Well, it's like that's what happens when you have a guy who's super lanky, like Adam Driver, beef up like a beefcake. Is that he gets super square? Like that's a natural thing that happens to skinny people.
Yeah. Logan, anything to add on how this holds up in the aftermath of Rise of Skywalker?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, it's just the idea that I've kind of brought for years at this point now that me and Trevor have had this kind of back and forth dance all the time. I mean, I think the sequel trilogy is made worse by the fact that there's not a plan for it, right? And me and Trevor did, I think, come to some consensus on this when we talked about it 2 days ago. And in terms of, like, I feel like whenever I say that, people kind of think that I mean that there needs to be an MCU-style 50-movie game plan here. That's not what I ever mean when I say there needs to be a plan behind it. I just mean that there needs to be a plan, that they have any sort of idea of what they're doing, because to Frank's point that he just brought up, yeah, new shit, huge new shit is brought up in Rise of Skywalker. Like, every film in the sequel trilogy just does its own shit. Like, it doesn't, like, every film sort of doesn't address what happened before it. It just, like, does brand new things. And it's like it's starting a brand new trilogy again. And so you get to the end of the trilogy in Rise of Skywalker, and it's like, this is not flowed together at all. And it just, I think you're seeing that begin to kind of blossom a little bit here. It'll really come to fruition in 9, obviously, where they just do their own thing. Rise of Skywalker is a sequel to a movie that doesn't exist. And Last Jedi is sort of like that in some ways. Like, it's definitely Ryan Johnson being like, I'm just not going to answer some of the questions because I don't find them interesting, which, like, fair. But the problem is that if there had been a bigger game plan, they could have been like, here are the beats we want to hit, right? And the big one for me is obviously when you get to the end of the sequel trilogy, it becomes abundantly clear that there is no villain in the sequel trilogy. There is no overarching bad guy. Every single movie in the sequel trilogy has its own villain, and it doesn't work because of that. So that when we get to 9, aside from the fact that it doesn't work because it's fucking stupid, it doesn't work because that moment isn't earned, and we haven't built up to it, and it's just so random and jarring, right? And so I think it just makes everything worse, right? And I think the lack of a plan in any sense, like, it feels like there wasn't even like a sketch of an idea of what the sequel trilogy would look like, weakens not so much Kylo and Rey, but it definitely weakens Finn, and it definitely weakens Poe, who are characters that just kind of get the short shift of things in 9, especially Finn. I mean, Finn is a character, and John Boyega is an actor that just totally screw over in the sequel trilogy by the end. Like, he just gets absolutely nothing to work with, and the growth he gets in 8 as far as he gets, which is sort of why I say that I think it would have been more interesting if he had actually died on the suicide run in 8, because at least then he would have gotten an ending to that character arc. Whereas in 9, he just gets like no growth at all, basically.
Yeah.
And they just kind of, I think, squander that character in some ways. And Rose totally gets screwed over in 9. They just give her like a cameo scene and that's it. And so I think that's sort of the issues I have. But even Kylo and Rey, right? Like, this is their best moments, are 7 and 8. And in particular 8, and then in 9, those characters' growth gets rolled back, I would argue, right? Like, neither one of them gets like the kind of ending they should get, especially Kylo, where like this movie ends and Kylo Ren is the main bad guy of the series. He's a bad guy. He's committed to being the bad guy. He's the villain of the trilogy now. That's how it should have carried forward. But
he's
they
made the
couldn't commit to
definitive
that.
choice to be somebody who desires to control and have power over the galaxy.
100%.
And that's his
That's
goal.
exactly right. That's exactly right. Like, he wants to destroy the past. That is his overarching like idea, and then build something from that in his own corrupted version, right? But like, they don't let him have that ending in 9, and I think it's one of the most unfortunate parts of that movie when we'll get to it. But yeah, so I mean, that in the context of 9, 8 is made better, obviously, because it's a better movie, but it's also sort of weakened in the sense of like, I guess the one sentence review of the sequel trilogy is just nothing really matters because they make their own rules up in the next movie anyway. So like, nothing really like carries forward in these movies, it feels like, and that's unfortunate.
Yeah.
Cam, what are your thoughts?
My thoughts about it are very similar to Logan and Frank's and your own. In this, that there is, and I will say this, there is a distinct intentional lack of sanctity for quote-unquote Star Wars in this film. And it's intentional, because that's part of the deconstruction process, is that you basically say nothing is too hollow ground to tread upon and take apart. And for better or worse, that's what Rian Johnson does in this film. And then for the sequel afterwards, for J.J. Abrams to come in and say, actually, things are sacred, and I'm going to put them back together. And it's like, cool, all right, how are you going to do that? Because what you've reassembled doesn't look anything like what we saw before 8. So what's going on here? And I think a big shift in that in particular is the lightsaber of Star Wars, like the lightsaber that is Anakin's original lightsaber, the quote unquote Skywalker lightsaber. At the end of 8 is broken in half as like a perfect symbology of the relationship between Kylo and Rey, which has kind of been formed around this lightsaber and like their connection to it. And like there's a whole lot of depth there behind everything that we're talking about with like those characters and this lightsaber. And it breaking in half is also like a symbol of this, like the two takes on the Skywalker legacy, so to speak. Like that of what Kylo Ren's going to do, which is assume power and control. And then what Rey is going to do, where she's going to help people. Like a lot of people are like, oh, she becomes the Last Jedi, and I would argue at the end of the film she actually doesn't become the Last Jedi, the Jedi are quote unquote no more. This is this new thing. And then at the very beginning of 9, it's like, nope, she's a Jedi. We're just doing Jedi and Sith again. That's what's going on, guys. And it hurts the momentum, positive or negative. It just hurts the momentum of the trilogy to grind it to a fucking halt. And then on top of that, you start your goddamn crawl with, and we'll talk about this way more in depth next week, the way that it starts in episode 9, to like the biggest cringe factor of my heart in the entire franchise is in that the first phrase in that crawl.
Mm-hmm.
So like I will say, like, because of the legacy of the sequel trilogy being what it is, for all the reasons that Frank and Logan went into, like The Last Jedi I think is made better for it, but is also hurt by it because we'll never get to see what these things could have been, because once again you have no overarching vision for this trilogy. So
yeah, I disagree slightly in kind of how some of you guys have touched on this. In particular, and again, this, as I've discussed with Logan the other day, like, this is not a thing that I originally came up with. I know I saw it in somebody else's like think piece video or something about that, or somebody, you know, tweeted at or something like that. But I think, and I just happen to think, oh, that actually explains what I think in a really succinct way. And that is that I think Rian Johnson took what J.J. Abrams set up in 7 and does the whole improv thing of yes and tries to, like, doesn't necessarily go the most expected route with the decisions that he makes, but he does accept what came before and move forward with it. Whereas when that handoff, the baton goes from back to J.J. Abrams in the next movie, the way I described it to Logan, this is me actually, is that J.J. Abrams does improv more like Michael Scott in The Office, where he just pulls out a gun and starts shooting at things. I don't like he very wink to the camera in a couple moments, basically says like, that last movie, disregard this thing. The most visual reference of it, I would say, is and kind of like ties into what you were talking about there, Cam, of like
the lightsaber.
No, not the lightsaber. Kylo's mask. Like, Kylo's mask is destroyed. Like, it is a moment in this of him like breaking free of like that. It like, I look at it as he's breaking beyond wanting to just be Vader. Part of it is because Snoke is calling it a ridiculous thing, but then, I mean, ever since like the first trailers of Rise of Skywalker, and seeing that he has like stitched it back together, welded it back together, or whatever.
I hate that.
I was like, oh, I don't think this is going to go how I want it to go. And sure enough, it doesn't. So I think that is like, that's the visual like barf that I kind of experience in Rise of Skywalker, that does end up ultimately like weakening some moments. But as Logan often kind of will touch on, is like what you want to like. And if you kind of want to disregard some of those things, then disregard some of those things. I'm like, all right, I guess I'll buy into that mentality a little bit. Like, I will still be like, okay, it happens in Star Wars, and it's not going to be the Star Wars choices that I would have made or that I'm necessarily going to like, but I still can have these really cool moments and these really cool character beats in Last Jedi. And the thing that I think that always stands out to me whenever I watch Last Jedi, and the thing that I really am most drawn to it, is that this, more than I think any other Star Wars up to this point, plays in and lives in the grays as opposed to the light and the dark. And I think that's a much more, just as from a storytelling perspective, and from like, you know, my years doing theater and stuff, that's just a more interesting place to live, as opposed to high melodrama of there's pure good and there's pure evil, as we oftentimes see in these kinds of stories. So I appreciate that. I appreciate that Luke faltered and, you know, is living with that mistake and has made these decisions that he makes. I appreciate that like Rey and Kylo have this kind of like dichotomy a little bit of trying to see each other's perspectives and trying to like change one another, and then having what is arguably my favorite lightsaber sequence of any of them in the Snoke's throne room fight, and like lightsabers don't connect with one another at all in that sequence, but it is still a really epic and incredible fight. In part, choreography is great, but also because of like everything happening around it. The fact that it is like burning down is just a really cool visual. So I really like things like that. I really like that even the Canto Blight stuff kind of plays into that idea of like, well, yeah, these people got rich, and you think they got rich because they're selling TIE fighters to the First Order, but they also sell X-Wings to your guys. So, you know, it is a little bit more murky territory and stuff like that. And I mean, that's probably why I enjoy DJ as a character in general, is because he
calls out the hypocrisy. Yeah.
He calls out the hypocrisy, but he's also like, you know, he's happy to be a good guy and like take the gold, but he uses it as a conductor, and then he gives it back to Rose because he sees that it means something to her, and he'll figure he'll get his payment otherwise. But then, you know, to save his own skin, he cuts a deal with the Empire. So like I enjoy, and that's where I would just be fascinated to see what other things he's doing. How did he know code breaking and stuff? I have this like backstory in my head of like he used to like work as a, you know, developing the code for the Empire or something like that, and moved away, and maybe he was, you know, idyllic at some point and faded from that. Who knows?
That's part of the problem that I actually have with this character, is that it's like he's this MacGuffin that gets introduced to solve a problem.
He is incredibly convenient. Yes, I don't refute that at all. Go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead. And that's just Sorry.
I was just saying the last thing that I really love about this movie, and it's less about like playing in grays and stuff, but is that its core message for me ends up being a core message that I think probably gets told better a couple years later in Into the Spider-Verse, but it is the idea of like anybody can wear the mask, and you have you have it kind of introduced that Rey came from nothing and can be this incredible force of power in the galaxy. It's reinforced with Luke having come from nothing and is this incredible legend in the Skywalker Saga. But then you have like Broom Kid, and you even have like Rose having that little kind of story about how her and her twin grew up in like a poor mining village, and then heard, you know, that Finn had gone and done this thing, and that you know, these people were fighting the First Order and signed up and all this stuff. And so there's a lot of like anybody can wear the mask behind this movie that I really just love, and continues to resonate with me all these years later. So Frank, I'll throw it back to you. What were you gonna say?
I agree with a lot of what you said, and to one of your earlier points, like I do like the idea, like in the Canto Blight stuff. Like I think it's a cool idea just for a setting. But I think part of the problem is like they do kind of shine a light on some of these things in like this military industrial complex, and like, oh, look at all this stuff that you guys did because you're fighting this like endless war, and they're just serving both sides. And it brings that up, and that's really cool. But I also think it drops it really quick, and then it just kind of doesn't go anywhere in this movie. And then of course in 9 and everything else going forward, like it just doesn't ever amount to like a bigger thing, which I would have appreciated like if it did. And I don't know necessarily where you kind of take that or that sub story or that storyline, but those are the things that like I like the shadier side of the universe, and I like the seedier side. And then this is even more interesting because this isn't like the bounty hunter, you know, shady side. This is like the super highfalutin billionaire Jeff Bezos like side. Highfalutin. So that's what I think is like, I think it's interesting. I just think it could have been like done. We could have spent like, I don't know if I want to say we spent more time there, but like it could have been done better, differently, or expanded upon. And even kind of similarly with DJ, because like, and then sorry, my other point with him is I don't necessarily mind him as a character, but I agree with Cam. It's like a little bit too convenient for me.
Yeah.
And that's 8 is when things just start to get too convenient. And then in 9, things are way too convenient for me. Mm-hmm. And that's what I don't like that in a lot of my storytelling, especially the Star Wars, where it's like, why is this person going here? How does this guy just show up in this coin? I have the exact thing you need right here. Like,
yeah,
it's just like, sometimes too convenient for me.
Yeah, no, agree. Like, and yeah, Logan and I talked about that. The idea that, Maz Kanata makes a point to say, like, I only know one person that could do this, and it's this guy. And then you, like, they don't see that guy, and they just happen to end up in a jail cell with another guy who can do it. So yeah, it is, you know, Deus Ex DJ, I guess. One of the things I touching on the Canto Blight stuff of like it maybe not serving a purpose is I do think it serves a purpose to lock in Finn's like what Finn is fighting for, because and this is something that I often see kind of brought up as like, you know, Finn's people argue like Finn's arc is the same in this movie as it is in the first movie, and I disagree with that, because his arc in the first movie is a selfish and a personal relationship of like he's like he leaves the First Order and then ultimately like wants to fight for Rey. He's not fighting for the Resistance. He's not like he's actively often trying to get away from the Resistance and leave the whole war effort behind. Whereas this one wakes up and he's like back at that point of like trying to get to Rey, and his journey with Rose leads him to and seeing the grays of this world leads him to say like, I don't want to live in the gray. I want to like, I'm going to fight for the Resistance. I'm going to fight for these people, to the point that as Logan kind of alluded to earlier, at the end, he's like about ready to give up his life to give the Resistance a shot by, you know, suicide running, Independence Daying into the death bay, the death beam.
And then he gets saved by the one rescue that makes absolutely no physics sense whatsoever. It doesn't make any sense how she got back to him whatsoever.
I mean, much like J.J. Abrams doesn't understand space in last week's episode, there are definitely moments where Rian Johnson doesn't understand physics. Another great example is the detonator for the bombs in the opening sequence, like falling in very real time and just seeing like the girl like turn her head, and then suddenly she still is able to like grab it. He
does, like, for a guy who made a movie about time, he doesn't understand time very well at all, to the point where it's extremely frustrating with the main.
There are a few moments like that kind of like, if you'd like just stitched it together so it made a little bit more like chronological sense, I'd appreciate that. But before we dive into like favorite moments and or least favorite moments, I do want to bring in one last little trivia thing that I thought about as we were kind of talking through things. It's something I mentioned with Logan the other day. One of the things that has admittedly bothered me every time I've watched it, even through this most recent viewing, is Luke saying, wake up at dawn, I'm going to give you 3 lessons. And then throughout the movie, you only get 2 lessons. And the trivia is that the third lesson is a deleted scene that you can watch on Disney Plus. And this is the first time I'd actually sat down and watched it. It happens basically after after Luke kind of like confesses, doesn't fully confess and doesn't say like, here's what happened, but it's like I failed Kylo, and Rey's like, you didn't fail Kylo, like Kylo failed you, before Kylo tells her what really happened, and then Luke gives like the real version of events. Right after that scene, there's like a horn that blows, and it is it's the caretakers on the island, and there's like a few boats that are like coming to the island, and Rey asks what's going on, and Luke tells this story about once a month raiders come and kind of attack the caretakers, and like the Jedi edicts would have you sit this out, because if you interfere, they're just going to come back next time with more warriors or something like that. And Rey, being Rey, says, screw that, I'm going to go help. And she runs down there. There's also some very weird like running where she kind of like feels like she's flying a little bit. But she runs in, she barges into the scene, and there's effectively like almost like an Ewok-esque Return of the Jedi celebration that's going on. It's like a party. It's not like Luke was lying. It's not really a Raiders or something like that. And like Chewbacca's there and R2-D2's there and Porgs are around or whatever. And she like waves her lightsaber at them, and they all, get happy and cheer and stuff. And then she kind of like confronts Luke about that, and he's like, I'm sorry, you just ran off so fast, I couldn't. And it ends up being like, what the Resistance needs is a warrior that will fight for them, not a Jedi that would sit out and not do this. And that's the lesson that was the third lesson. That's
a cool lesson. Why'd they cut that out?
I mean, for time, basically.
It's already a long ass movie. Give us that extra 15 minutes. I don't care. That would have been awesome.
Yeah. And it had like, there's another moment that she has of like, maybe you don't maybe you don't believe in the legend of Luke Skywalker, but I did. I believed in it, and like that helped make Rey who she is, kind of thing. So it's like it's a really good scene. I definitely recommend, and it's like it is only like 2.5 minutes or something like that. So if you haven't watched it, go check it out on.
I'm gonna check it out afterwards. I'm gonna check it out after we do this,
because I really like it. It's got a little bit of humor, it's got a little bit of heart, and it it closes the loop on that, like, where's that third lesson, what's going on? But he doesn't like phrase it as like this is the third lesson or whatever. It is just like in context you see, oh, that was the lesson he was trying to make. Anyway, so yeah, I just wanted to highlight that as one last little trivia bit that I quite enjoyed. So anybody want to kick things off with any favorite scenes?
I will.
Okay.
I'll go ahead and start things off just so I can, like, I have a list of things I want to go through.
Cool.
I will cover the positive things, the things I loved on this list. Something I want to say, and this is actually a very interesting kind of like a dichotomy between the two directors. Watching this film, I definitely came away from it thinking like, okay, I think I understand like Rian Johnson's strength in his cinematography are in these tight scenes. They're in these scenes of like the throne room scene. It's in a lot of these like his iconic scenes. When I think of this film and watch this film and think about like, okay, this is an iconic scene, like for like a cinematography standpoint, is these closer scenes. It's not these big like we talked about it last week. These big open environments that are just like lit well and done so well in such a very J.J. Abrams-esque way. And in contrary to that, Rian Johnson, when he is the shift from J.J. Abrams' version in at the end of The Force Awakens to the tight-in version that we get at the beginning of The Last Jedi was jarring to me because I didn't remember it being that stark of a contrast. And
are you talking like the Luke and Rey scene?
Yeah, Rey scene.
The big helicopter shot into the actual like real
the ocean
moments.
Background. They're on this abandoned island together, like this whole thing, and then for it to be a much more tighter scene closer in was very jarring to me because I wasn't expecting it. As somebody who's now been watching it on my phone because I can't get the browser version of Disney Plus to work, like this has been what I'm doing, and like. I will say that like that was quite jarring for me. But it made me appreciate the way that it made me appreciate J.J. Abrams a lot more. And it made me really appreciate Rian Johnson in some of these tighter scenes. But also the way that he used, like the scenery and elements that Rian Johnson used are, I felt were very different from the ones we saw. Not just because of the environments of being taking place on different planets, but also just kind of the way like shots looked. Like shots are, I would say, quote unquote, are cleaner in this film than they were in J.J. Abrams. J.J. Abrams, there was always something like there is it always felt like and I thought back to it, there's particle effects in the air, whether it's on Jakku, the dust and sand just in the air, whether it's Maz Kanata, where it's like it's the smoke and kind of hearthiness of her establishment, and or the like kind of like luscious atmosphere of the more natural parts of the planet itself, the grunginess of the Millennium Falcon and Han and Chewbacca's freighter. Like there's so much about like that made it feel more of a busy world, and I felt like Rian Johnson's in contrast to that, Rian Johnson's, because even the First Order base on the Starkiller base in Force Awakens felt like there was still like stuff happening, like this is a lived-in place. And Rian Johnson, I felt, was like something I appreciated about it. Like Snoke's throne room is immaculate; it is without blemish, and it does not feel lived in. It feels like this is a would-be emperor in his would-be throne room. Like draped in a gold robe, like this whole thing about that. It fits that scene so well when Kylo goes in initially, and like Hux is there, and the way that it just does it so well in like setting this up in this way, but it hurts it in other places where it hurts it in a few other places, I think. But that's just something I noticed right away, is like I really appreciated the cinematography in that from that standpoint.
One thing I want to touch on real quick there in response to the cinematography, not necessarily the grunginess effect that you're kind of touching on, but like the close shots and the closeness of it. One of the things I love, and I think that you're kind of speaking towards even, is like even the scenes, I mean, all of the scenes really between Rey and Kylo that are in completely two different like places, but because like it's set up and established that they're able to see each other, they're talking directly to one another.
The way it's shot, it's like they're in the same
exactly
room.
The way we continually go back and forth between those people, like you expect to see, like you expect it to be a two shot when it's very clearly like only like on location and stuff. So I think that is
that's one of the strengths
is like
of
a great example of that in a very like surreal sort of way.
And when Luke barges in and it's like they're in the same room together, even though they're not, it's once again, it's his strength of creating these, and it's part of his strength of creating these strong character moments with good dialogue and other things like that you don't need these character looking off into the distance at the environment that's around them that you get in like Force Awakens. So another point I was going to make is, like, I will say I love everything that he does in the I guess you would call it like the Jedi B plot. Rey's, Luke, Kylo Ren, the idea of Jedi. Oh, and also talking about those tight shots again. When Luke is training Rey, but he's not teaching her cool lightsaber skills, he's teaching her about the mentality of like these are the problems, these were what we thought were solutions, like this is what hasn't worked before, like in testing her on like not just history but also like intuition and seeing how you feel about the Force and like what is the Force, like asking like what is the Force, and it's like it's not this thing you use to lift a rock, and he goes deeper into it, but there's an intensity to Luke. Like this is a man who felt he failed and left, and in that time he's not just been hiding and not thinking about what's happening. He has been deeply, deeply contemplating the philosophical ramifications of every single action he did in his lifetime, the same actions that the Jedi did as an order, as a whole, for thousands of years. And he has been looking at what the original Jedi said, what the original Jedi wrote, what was the original purpose of the Jedi, and really, like, in his own way, deconstructing Jedi. What does that mean? And what does it mean to the Force? Like, and when he says, like, the arrogance of the Jedi to think that we're needed for the Force is like outrageous. The Force is so much more than Jedi. It's so much more than Sith, and like this really deep philosophical stuff that as a fan I've thought about for years. And seeing it on screen from Luke Skywalker's mouth, like nonetheless, like, from Luke's mouth, was such a cool thing, and it also made him look like kind of like a wily old crazy dude. Those tight shots helped build it up as like Luke hasn't just been chilling on this island drinking like seal milk,
drinking green milk and
harpooning
fish
with a weird, stupid, lengthy harpoon. Whatever, it like that wasn't the point. It was great that he hasn't just been doing this. This has been a mental exercise for him to figure out what happened and like why did he fail, and kind of coming up with the realization that like failure was inevitable because of how he approached it. And which, you know, is like in question, because Rey questions that immediately and says like, why did you think that you failed? Like, you know, you didn't fail Kylo Ren failed you. That whole thing and spiel with that was, I think, very indicative of like this very much like he has become a hermit, not out of a necessary exile, but because he needs to figure out like what happened. And I felt like that is like, how do you deconstruct a savior? Luke Skywalker is a savior archetype. He is the savior trope. He is the hero with 1,000 faces, who goes on this journey and hits those points beat by beat to the point where he becomes the savior of the galaxy at the end of Return of the Jedi. And it's like, okay, cool. How do you deconstruct that? How do you create such a, not just a failure, but a massive personal failure? Because it's not just like, oh, I helped create Kylo Ren. It's like, I failed my sister. I failed my best friend. I failed my nephew, who I love like a child, like a son. And like this idea of like, how did I let this happen? How did I put the idea of good and evil over the universe, over like the love and compassion I should have for my own nephew? And taking it to such drastic measures, like how did I get there with that, is such a great, like, you know, as somebody who's an uncle, I've been an uncle longer in my life than not being an uncle. Like I have spent more time in my life being an uncle than before I was an uncle. I will probably not have children of my own, barring some like other stuff that is not relevant, but I don't intend to have my own children. I don't intend to have kids at all. The love I feel for my siblings' children is deep. I love them so much. I would gladly give my life for any of them. And like to be granted the responsibility that Luke was granted by Han and Leia in an attempt to quote unquote save their son. You redeemed, quote unquote, redeemed Vader. He's this mythical hero to the galaxy. Like, how does that like weigh on a man who is just was raised to be a moisture farmer on Tatooine? Like, he's a farm boy who became the savior of a galaxy. But what is that, like, where does that lead a person? And I think that is this what, and like Mark Hamill said it the best, I disagree fundamentally with everything you've done with this character. But Rian Johnson commits to it. And commits to it so hard that I think, and it works so well by the end of the film because of it. The deconstruct, like Rey getting a crash course in, why do you think you need some super specialized lengthy training to be a Jedi? Like I had a little green man on my back for a couple weeks, and I was the savior of the galaxy. Like, you know, the force of this whole notion of like what the Jedi are and what they were supposed to be and everything is such a great thing. And it's something I really, really love about this film. I think it's its strongest point. I think this is definitely where the majority of Rian Johnson's efforts went into. And I think that's why it's still, after everything, all three films are out, this is still like some of my favorite stuff in the entire, not just this sequel trilogy, but in the entire saga. Like this stuff, this idea of like the ramifications of legacy and what they like, and what happens when you fuck up in a way that you can't take back. You can't take back what you've done. What do you do? I didn't come out to the most unfindable place in the galaxy to, I forgot the rest of the line that he says, but he talks about how he went out there for a purpose. I didn't come out here without a purpose. And like you showing up here and saying, I'm the person who has to come back and save the galaxy. The opening crawl says it itself. Like they're looking for him as the last spark of hope for the galaxy. And this deconstruction of like, do you need a savior?
What am I going to do? Face down the whole First Order? Yeah.
With my laser sword?
Yeah.
Nails that line. Mark Hamill is so damn good. He nails it.
Logan,
his interaction with Daisy Ridley also is just like top tier, peak tier, love it. Also, Kylo Ren saying, shoot him more!
Yes. Logan, I want to throw it to you because I know you have many, many thoughts on some of the stuff that Cameron has said, so feel free to weigh in.
Yeah, I mean, I disagree with most of it. I agree with the central idea that it is a part of the film that Rian Johnson put the most effort in, because like it very clearly is. I think for me, it's one where it just doesn't work, right? Like, and I think part of my beef with Last Jedi is, you know, everything Cameron said, very kind of, I think, with all of the emotion and enthusiasm that he did for 5-10 minutes, and like, I enjoy seeing the Twitter threads about Luke in the film. I enjoy seeing the articles. I've read a lot of people talk about Luke Skywalker and listened to a lot of people talk about Luke Skywalker in the film. And every time I do, I just sort of come to the conclusion that we were just watching different films. We were just watching different movies, right? Like, I just disagree on a fundamental level, I think. I think that the problem is that I agree with...
You met your hero.
I agree with Mark Hamill's interpretation from the beginning of like, I just fundamentally disagree with the direction we took the character, right? And I think that's sort of the crux of the thing for me, right? And so from that point onwards, I'm not going to like the decisions you do with it. And like, to be fair, me and Trevor talked about this a couple days ago. The problem starts with 7, right? And Rian Johnson just has to like deal with the thing that J.J. Abrams started of like, why is Luke gone? And he has to give us an answer to it now. And so I don't like how the question is started. I'm probably not gonna like the answer, and I don't, right? And I think the irony for me is that I like a lot of the elements around it, right? Like I like Kylo Ren's dynamic with Han and Luke and these relationships that have been kind of twisted and corrupted and bent because of what has happened. I like that a lot. And I like the repercussions on his character's arc. But in terms of what it does for Luke, right, like I just don't agree with that. Like I ultimately came to the consensus when I talked to Trevor for the 500th time about Last Jedi that, you know, I enjoy what this movie does with the legend of Luke Skywalker, right? And building that out. And Luke being the spark that fans the rebellion at the end of the film, right? That Luke literally does face down the whole First Order, right?
With his laser sword.
With just a laser sword. And it is a great moment. And that he does spread like a legend a second time, right? Like there are the kids playing and reenacting that moment, right? That he did just stop everything, right? And that the legend of Luke carries forward, right? And the kid with the broom at the end is Luke with the twin sons, right? Like I like all of that element of it. I just don't like Luke Skywalker in the film, right? Like that's the problem. Like I don't like the character of Luke Skywalker, who, as we talked before, is my favorite character in the film. And so I think it doesn't work, right? And I think it doesn't work from really simple, dumb stuff of like, yeah, like Luke and the lightsaber is stupid and unnecessary. The whole weird, like, Luke is like a kind of a creep and like doing the milk shit and stabbing the fish stuff. Like, I don't think any of that really works, right? Like, I think that Luke Skywalker never works for me that well when he's just angry and despondent and just cynical. And we get a lot of those 3 traits of Luke in this film. And like, even thinking back in it, like in this conversation, right? Like Luke's, I don't know, like switch, I guess, in the movie doesn't really even sync up well, right? Because it is just like Rey and him have their confrontation, yell at each other. Here's what actually happened, the clue ending kind of thing. And then Rey leaves, and we don't see anything with Luke again after it. Like, we don't get any scene of him being like reflecting and like thinking about Leia, all this other shit. It's just like Rey leaves, and we don't see Luke again for like 45 minutes, and then he's just at the end of the movie. Like, we don't see him have like a I get it now moment. Like,
you're complete.
Like, he's gone.
Like, no, the
Yoda
moment
scene,
is
the
the Yoda
lightning?
scene. It's your favorite scene. That's what you get.
Yeah, but
that's where he makes his turn.
That's where it is. That's where the flip switch.
That to me is not the turn in terms of like him being like it's not the turn.
Or the switch flip.
That to me is a different turn. Like that to me is a turn of like Luke.
You
I
never
think
see him
coming
make the
to
decision
terms-
to project himself across the galaxy.
Yeah.
is what you're saying.
Or
And
even
which
just
is,
like
such a
get involved in the
badass thing.
fight in a sense, right? And I think for me, so much of the issue with Luke is, and like I've talked about this with a lot of people, but like I think, you know, the idea that Luke is, yeah, like to Cameron's point, I think the phrase he used was like the savior of the galaxy, right? The hero of A Thousand Faces, obviously Joseph Campbell stuff, right? Like Luke is that force in the original trilogy, right? Like Luke is the balance to Han and Leia's more, you know, cynical nature, right? And I think the strength of Luke Skywalker is that he brings that optimism, he brings that hope out of them, right? Like he is the titular New Hope, right? And I think that is where that character works best, that he kind of instills it into the people. And so to see him at the other end of that spectrum, right? Like, obviously, I don't agree that Luke would ever try to kill his nephew, but that's beside the point. That's what we're going to go with. Okay, sure.
Yeah, I mean, as an
And
uncle,
I don't
would
agree
never
with
ever
I
raise.
don't agree with the
my-
idea that Luke would ever just like leave the galaxy for 6 years, right? Like, but like that's where we have to try to get him at. And so like, it's the problem of like where we started 7 at has to kind of come to roost in 8. And since I don't like where 7 takes us, I'm not gonna like where 8 takes us. And I don't, right? Like I don't like this version of Luke Skywalker. Like I just think it is not flow from where we left the character off, right? And I think for me, this goes back to again when they announced the sequel trilogy. When they announced, not even when they announced the sequel trilogy, when they announced that like Lucasfilm had been bought by Disney, and I was like, here are the 3 things. Like I'm super excited for new Star Wars movies. Love the series. Love that they're going back to like original characters. all this is great. I really just want three things: for them not to kill Luke, for them not to bring back Palpatine, and for them not to fuck up 6. And they did all of them, and they did all of them in like spectacular fashion, right? And like, and so it's that thing for me of like, I think one of the central problems I have with 8 is it's such passionate, like fervent drive at the movie to basically echo Kylo Ren's line of like, destroy the past, like kill it if you have to, but like just like leave nothing left, right? And like part of it is because Carrie Fisher passed away in her life, but like by the time the sequel trilogy ends, they've done like they've killed off the original cast. They're all dead. And that to me is just a really bleak, shitty version of Star Wars, right? Like I don't need all of my heroes to be dead by the end of the sequel trilogy. Like that to me is not what I'm here for, right? And like part of it, again, you can't help because Carrie Fisher, you can't control her passing away in real life, obviously. And Harrison Ford would have never come back on board if you didn't kill him off. Like that was like, I am sure there was like line number one, even before like give me money, he was like, kill this motherfucker. And so like you really
he's
left
always
with Luke,
that,
right? And
so.
I think, yeah, like Harrison Ford's been very famous about that, yeah. And so like I think you're left with Luke, right? And I think Luke is like, I think it's better to have Luke not die, especially in the context of like, this is really Luke's only movie, right? Like he's in a cameo in 7, and he basically gets a cameo in 9, and that's essentially it, right? Like this is the one movie that he's in, and we kill him off at the end, right? And I think all of the conversations around Last Jedi to me essentially boil back to this, right? Like I don't like what Cameron said is the central part of the film, which is the story between Luke and Rey.
Oh, that's
Kylo
not
Ren,
the
right?
central
Like,
part of the film, I feel. But go ahead.
I think Luke's journey is like, I think the two main characters of the movie are Luke and Kylo Ren. I talked to Trevor about this, right? And I think these are two main characters. I like Kylo Ren. I don't like Luke's arc in this, really. Like I like the hero version of it. Like I like that half of his story, like him as a legend, and what that does is like an inspiration. But I don't like the person. The person doesn't feel, I think, authentic and genuine to me, to who we've kind of dealt with before. And like to preempt Trevor's line that he said when we talked earlier of like, you only get like so much time with these characters in the movies, like do you know what they actually are? Like that to me, again, like I said at the time, is that like, yes, because that's what a story's supposed to tell me, is who these people actually are, A, and B, we're getting pretty definitive version of them. Cameron's got a question. Trevor's going to have thoughts, I'm sure, as well. And Frank's going to have thoughts as well, I'm sure. But, like, yeah, I mean, like, that's where I would start off this conversation.
Quick question I would have is, how often does the legend actually match up to the human being? I don't know if there's a single legend in, like, when you actually take a look at legends,
to that though, like
look at these mythical figures, how many of them falter because guess what? They're human.
Logan's point, though, and I'll jump in on this one for you, Logan. Like Logan's point is, we see the legend of Luke created in the original trilogy, and it is like him being the real person. So, like, I don't think that's I don't think that point like necessarily
sorry, but let me carry that forward. No, like, but also like, how many of those people who do those legendary things stay static as they are the same exact person that they were back when they did those things? Like, people fall off, legends fade, they, like, there are so many examples that you could use in real life, but I'm only asking that as a question. I'm not saying this is why they did that. I'm just saying, what is your take on the evolution of a mythological figure like Luke is when you actually peel away the layers of this, like, incredible like, this incredible hero, like, where are the faults? Where are the fault lines? Where are the cracks in the person? So I'm asking.
I think my counter to that, right? If I could also, like, just real quick, Trev, is that like, or basically just that one. I think really what we get in Last Jedi is a retread of Luke's entire arc in the original trilogy, just done in one movie. And I think it's done better in the original trilogy, and not even is it done better. I think it's obviously just given more time to breathe and develop, and it's just done already, right? Like, if people don't like the fact that there's like another Death Star in Force Awakens, I don't like the fact that we get Luke's journey again and not as good and in less time in this movie, right? Like, fair. And the second point I'd argue is that I think the counter to that I would have is that this is where I think the weaknesses of the deconstruction of of Last Jedi come into play, right? Because like, I think I very rarely find it interesting to do a story of what if this person was bad, right? Like, I don't really find that element interest in any version of what that is. Like, I don't really need, like, what if Batman was bad, and what if Superman was bad, and what if this is bad? Like, I think more often than not, those stories aren't interesting, and they're not as good. And I think in a similar vein, like, yeah, like, it turns out not good Luke isn't as interesting to me, right? Like, I don't enjoy that character very much. I don't enjoy his story very much, right? And, like, to me, I don't want Luke to be static, and I don't want Luke to be perfect. What makes Luke great is the fact that Luke is the regular person, right? Like, Luke is someone who is just the average person, right? Like, he is any one of us. He is just someone who is looking at the horizon and has dreams and has things, but also has a great amount of doubt and fear and worry and isn't sure in his own capabilities, but thinks that, you know, he has a life beyond that moisture farm on Tatooine, right? And that is what makes him interesting, that he does constantly fail throughout the original trilogy, and that it is only through renouncing violence, like this movie has him do, that he ultimately comes to, you know, save his father and save the universe, right? And it is that arc, right? And so I think to get it here, I don't want Luke to be static, and I don't want Luke to not be flawed. I like when Luke is flawed. That is who that character is. But the static nature argument for me is I want to see him keep growing in that, right? Like, I don't believe that he would just give up on everything, right? Like, to me, the Luke, after what happens to Kylo Ren, he would double down on that effort, right? Like, he would try something different, right? Like, to me, because he has that experience of saving his father, right? Whatever we want to call it. We don't like to call it he's saved in this podcast, apparently. But, like, because he saved his dad,
I think
right?
is fine. Redeeming, I think, is the word
he brought his dad back, right? And so I think for me, Luke losing Kylo Ren would be a lot like what Leia says throughout the series of, like, I think there's still something in him, right? I think it would be him as the counter to Snoke, right? And I think for Rian Johnson, the problem with that is that, like, that's the story we got with Vader in the original trilogy. So I don't want to do that again. And the problem becomes, great, we have this gray area that we can explore, right? And I would have loved to see that exploration more, especially with Ren fully being the bad guy by this movie, right? Like, what would that dynamic look like with Luke and Ren look like in 9 if we had gotten that? If it had just been Kylo Ren's the bad guy, Luke is still there, Rey is still there, what does all of this look like now, right? And Rey is kind of in this gray area too a little bit, but more on the light side, right? And so I'm all for that, right? I just think that we just get a retread of original trilogy, and I think Luke's growth would have been him becoming more of a Yoda or more of an Obi-Wan figure, right? And learning the fact that he isn't perfect, right? Like, that element remains, but not because, you know, he has this catastrophic failure and just goes into, like, a catatonic state for 6 years like he's fucking Adrian Monk. It's because he, you know, learns other failures along the way, right? And stumbles and falls, and I just don't think that his hope would have been extinguished so significantly. Like, I don't think it was so fragile that one failure, to a grand degree, obviously, but one failure just gets rid of all of it, would be my thing.
So a couple things that I was going to jump in on. One is this conversation reminded me of this piece that that Logan has up on the website about Assassin's Creed in particular, because I think there's a parallel between like the legend of Luke that has been drawn and the legends of Socrates and Pericles and stuff that Logan very astutely and really appreciates about Assassin's Creed Odyssey, is how, like, it makes those characters like fully realized 3D people again, instead of putting them in their marble pedestal. And so I was like, oh, I can use this to, like, throw it back in Logan's face about how silly it is that Logan's met, but whatever. But the what was it? There was another element that I was gonna say that has now escaped my mind as well. So
also, we all know that the Last Jedi is actually just Grogu, right? So we're fine.
Sure. Frank, did you have anything you wanted to hop in and add on?
Yeah, just a little bit. I feel like I fall more on the side of Logan with everything we're talking about with Luke. I personally am not as hung up on the part of, like, him kind of abandoning everyone and leaving after this kind of failure. And I like the idea, and I kind of get what Cam is saying from it, where, like, he has to go reevaluate not only like his entire life, but like the entire Jedi Order and everything. Like, obviously, was this the whole original trilogy is this giant arc of him becoming a Jedi, and in the end, you get in Return of the Jedi, he's this Jedi Master. And then even to Logan's point too, it's like, but he does take in his own direction where him not fighting is how he actually is able to get around it. And this is a bit of a retread of that. But I kind of like that it's like a part of it is like a bigger retread of like it's him looking at the entire order, and and we even kind of get some of that. It could have been done better, but like in the prequels where it's like we saw them like they're arrogant and they're terrible and they're like these space cops that are like way overreaching their range, and it's like all these ideals that Luke now has to like struggle with like somewhere in the future. And that's why I like the idea of like burn that down and have Rey become something that's better, and like that this is the only way we're ever going to not just keep doing this cycle over and over again. Like, I like some of those ideas, but I very much just do not like a lot of the way they implemented it and the way that Luke acts and the way he comes off. And like, because to me, that's like a split of like, you can have him struggle with these things, and you can have him take down the old ways, and you can have him even abandon everybody in a way that like, even if we think like, why would he do like, oh, he wouldn't do that. I think that is something that is reasonable. And even if he's just trying to figure all this out, like he's struggling with more than, most people would be. And that's where, but it just bothers me that then when you finally go see him, he's just like an asshole, and like he throws the lightsaber over his shoulder. Like, that does kind of bother me. And I understand when we're talking about like, it's a dissection of like what is Star Wars, and that lightsaber means so much. So on the one hand, for Luke to just take it and go, oh, well, this doesn't mean anything, that also says a lot. But like that, like, dude, that like hurts me, where I'm like, that's your dad's lightsaber. You haven't seen that since he cut it out of your hand, and then you clinged to his satellite and you almost died. And somebody hands it to you and you just throw it into like behind you, like into the water almost. Like, that's just a scene. And then like the milk scene, like there's just so many scenes with Luke that repeated me that I legitimately just don't like. And I'm like, and it's just like, I'm like, you're like, he's just like, I get he's grown, he's aged, he's changed, but at this point I'm like, why just don't see him becoming this like, on one hand, this weird like zany Yoda type, because Yoda's really weird when Luke goes to him and he's like this old senile man now. I just don't, it's just weird for me to Luke to be old, senile, and just kind of like an asshole about things.
I mean, yeah, real quick before you jump in, Cam, I wanted to
awesome
as I've said to Logan on this before, like one of the reasons I appreciate that aspect of Luke in this is because he's following in the footsteps of his two masters, of Obi-Wan and Yoda. Both did that exact same thing. They failed at the end of Revenge of the Sith and went into exile for 20 years and
one of the
went into
worst
hiding
parts of that movie. Yeah.
Right. But it like to your point earlier, Logan, of like this sequel trilogy does get to examine the history of both eras really before it. Like that is an echo of that. And it is like Luke was never taught how to be a teacher. He was taught how to be a Jedi, but then how does he pick up from there and try and teach a new class of people? He's going to fail at that degree again. And when he fails and fails spectacularly with Kylo, like he says, like, I can't create a new, like, especially because part of the failure is Kylo kills all of his other students, or like takes any of them that survive and runs off to become the Knights of Ren or whatever. But yeah,
that's not who the Knights of Ren are.
Okay, sorry.
That's who this movie's Knights of Ren are.
So yeah, that was the like an element that I appreciate about it, and two, like Luke throwing the lightsaber over the shoulder is I understand people's frustration with that more than probably anything else in the movie, because it is like that is the most direct like slap to the fandom or whatever that I think Ryan Johnson has in this movie. But I also, going back to kind of some of the points we've already discussed, like some of that is established by like the fact that J.J. Abrams reintroduced the lightsaber in the last movie with no explanation as to why or how. Like, and like, so it's like, okay, like you want to use this iconography? I'll go ahead and use this iconography too. And I will throw it away. I will split it in half because you didn't create a valid reason to bring this back. And so there's like, I understand that frustration, both from the fandom's perspective, as well as like the directorial, this is what you're handing me as the final shot of this movie. So let's go from there. Like, if you don't get on board with like that moment of Luke throwing it over, you're probably not going to get on board for the rest of like the Luke arc in this movie. I think, at least that's kind of the vibe I have seen over it. The last little thing I'd remembered that I wanted to say earlier was hearing Logan talk about not wanting this trilogy to kill off the original core cast as it does, makes me think like, what an interesting alternate universe Logan that is out there that watched these movies in episodic order 1 through 9 instead of growing up with the original trilogy and seeing Luke Skywalker as the central character of this trilogy and as this godlike figure. Because if you watch it, starting with 1, Anakin becomes the central character, obviously, for the 6 movies, really. And like, oh, the original, like, by the end of the original trilogy, 4, 5, and 6, pretty much everybody from 1, 2, and 3 has been killed off. And so, like, alternate universe Logan would be really annoyed by the end of that movie. And then history repeats itself again here in 7, 8, and 9. Cam, throw it back over to you.
Yeah, just a quick thing. I'm assuming Logan knows who this is because he wrote an article about Greek philosophers. But so one of the reasons I love Mark Hamill's interpretation of like what Rian Johnson built for Luke in this is it speaks a lot to, it's very Diogenes like. Like, does everybody here know who Diogenes is? Or
I mean,
yeah.
like, I remember the name, but I would
Yeah,
not be
so
able to like
he is-
tell you his philosophy.
So he is the father of cynicism. Like, cynicism as a philosophical study, he is the originator of. He was a wild dude who lived in the public forum, like he slept there in a giant turned over barrel and hung out and ate trash with dogs. He was the rival and like philosophical enemy of the school of Plato and Socrates. Where one time, like I think it was Socrates was in the middle of giving like this very long dissertation on like the nature of humanity. Diogenes took a plucked chicken or a plucked bird, threw it at Socrates and said, "Socrates, there is your human." Like, would just troll him. And he lived his entire life like this because he said, if you really want to understand the nature of the universe, you can't be like doing this. He's famous for Alexander the Great, who was mentored by Socrates, went to Diogenes and met him. And he said, "Diogenes, I think you're like such a great philosopher. What can I do to learn from you? Is there anything I can do?" And Diogenes just said, "Yeah, can you move a little to the left? You're in the way of my son. Like I'm trying to get tanned right now." He is this very much this like curmudgeon-y asshole of a person. And so I love that interpretation of what is Luke like as a hermit. He's Diogenes on this island. Love it. So like I love that. I love that take of it being, instead of it being like I am hermiting in a wise like monastery like type way. Instead he's Diogenesing it up. Taking green milk from some seal aliens. Love it. And the
I think
That's
with the spike in.
that is a Nick Scarpinoism. He doesn't do that thing.
No, he just goes.
Doesn't even do that. Doesn't have a.
He doesn't make the noise because it's not sounding.
He has a face as he drinks and swallows milk. That's what we get.
I love it.
We get a hermit that is like living off the land and has been living off the land for many years. Like that's
it's like it just comes off as like.
And I appreciate it because it sets up Ray's line of like, "I've seen your routine. You're not busy." Which
it's true.
I think.
Go ahead.
Yeah.
I want to move on into like other moments and other elements.
I just want to say like I love that he's super Diogenes like, and I didn't think about it until Logan referenced. And you referenced Logan's article about like seeing Greek philosophers kind of like filled out in a way. In a little way, we got a little bit of Diogenes here. It's great.
I think for me, this goes back to something that I think Trevor said near the beginning of the podcast, which is that this movie has no sacred cows, right? There's nothing sacred about the film. And so
was
it's
not
sort
me,
of
that was
what
Cam.
It was Cameron. Okay, and so this is what I say a lot for the Daniel Craig run of James Bond movies, to bring it back full circle, obviously, to my other love. And in that, I always say, if you've no sacred cows, right? If you didn't, in Daniel Craig's case, if you didn't grow up watching and loving those movies, you're allowed to kind of blow up everything and do something different, right? And in that, you can lead to really great stories happening, right? Like Casino Royale or Skyfall, which is one of the very best Bond movies, one of the best movies the last 10 years. Skyfall's a masterpiece. It can also lead to you going terribly awry, right? Like I look at Spectre, where in blowing up everything that they'd kind of come before, they just went super off course of what a James Bond movie should be, especially in the 21st century. And similarly, that's just condensed into this movie. I think in blowing up all the sacred cows of Star Wars, you get things that you're able to kind of reinvent and build back better. And you also, to take a line from Joe Biden, I guess, and you also get things that don't work at all, I think, and elements that don't work in that kind of blown up things that were already established. And I think so much of what works and doesn't works in Last Jedi kind of comes down to that core element of, we're just going to be the bull in the china shop, and we're just going to kind of see how the plates fall after that and kind of build it back from there. And I think that just works and doesn't work to varying degrees, right? And everything is so condensed in this movie because it's the only movie in the trilogy that gets to do it like this, right? Because there was no plan, either before this to kind of set some of it up or afterwards to follow through on anything that's been established. You just have everything condensed into this one movie of, let's blow it all up and see what happens. And so I think a lot of the elements are just kind of weakened by that. And I will say, to kind of pivot to a different element of the film, one that I like but also take some critique with, is I love the ending of the movie. The actual ending scene of the movie of the kid back in the stables, I think is super well done. And I think is, it is the only time in the Skywalker Saga where we don't end on a main cast member, right? And you do get this image of essentially Luke looking at the twin suns again, with this child looking out at the horizon and seeing the spaceship go off and having big dreams, and the Force exists beyond the Skywalker Saga, right? Because for me, there's always been this weird conversation around Last Jedi and Rise of Skywalker about how, these movies are only about these characters and they're the only ones who matter in the universe and all this kind of stuff. And I'm like, again, I'm always I feel like we're watching different movies, because the whole point of Luke in the original trilogy is that he is just a regular dude, right? He is just anyone, and the Skywalker clan is all of 3 people, and one is a mom we don't even know about until the prequel trilogy. So really it's 2 characters, and then Kylo Ren basically is the Skywalker Saga. It's pretty vast, all 3 of them. It's their story. That's why they're pretty heavily involved in the thing. But they're all especially Luke is just a regular person, right? And so I like that moment, not because it's saying, oh, here's a breath of fresh air from beyond, these same characters. I like it because it is a full circle moment back to Luke, especially after Luke has just died, right? And it's almost like that spirit is carried over to this new kind of promising generation of that hope is being restored. The legend of Luke has kind of passed on to these new kids. And here is their twin son moment, right? So I love the end of the movie and what that kind of conveys, even if I don't necessarily agree with some of the, I think, criticism of the series' reliance on the Skywalkers and the series, everyone has to be related, right? I like the idea that Rey isn't related to anyone, especially to another question Trevor has said, in the context of 9, I love it, right? I have no problem. I'm not someone who saw episode 8 and was like, that's dumb that she's not related to someone. Would it have been cool if she was someone's relative? Would it have been cool if she was someone random's relative? Would it have been cool if she was she's the grandniece of Mace Windu or Kiadi Mundi or fucking Obi-Wan Kenobi? Sure, that'd have been neat. But I also, when it's she's related to no one, I'm yeah, okay, that's also cool. That's just what Luke was. He was a random nobody, basically. Or Han,
you say that,
or
but
all the other people. I think
as soon as Empire comes rolls around, Luke isn't a nobody. When it is established that Luke is Vader's son,
he's the son of one person, right? But he's not it's not this the lineage of 100 generations. I feel like,
but
I feel that's my beef. Is everyone talks to it's it's always about these characters, and it's like, it's their movies, it's their story. That's why it's about Anakin and Luke. The prequel is Anakin's story. The original trilogy is Luke's story. It's their story, right? Like,
Yeah, but
that's why it's about
they're the
them.
most powerful
Like-
characters in the universe for 60 years of the universe, effectively, or like whatever you want.
Which is not a long time. Yeah,
right.
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 Like, that's
No,
the thing.
I get that, but like
We're just getting such a small
It's about
scope
9
of
movies
time.
with
with the
going
universe.
back to the point of like, well, these are the 6 movies that we'd seen up to this point, and the time we've spent in this universe up to this point, like that is what has been presented to us. Is that like especially in hindsight, like yeah, the episode 9 really fucks everything up, because then it turns the whole nineology into, okay, I guess it was about Palpatine all along, not about Anakin Skywalker.
Can we not talk about 9? Can we
Or
just go
Luke,
back?
Yeah.
or anything. Yeah.
Yeah,
It's
anyway.
like-
But yeah, I think that's like, it's, while it's nice to like set up the idea that like, Luke is just an everyman, like it seems that Lucas's plan was never to have him just be an everyman. He is this
I think
He is part of the
lineage.
chosen one. His father
think
was
it
created
was
from
for him-
midichlorians itself. He is the child
Yeah,
of
but we
that
didn't know it at
man,
the time,
and he has
right?
helped
Like,
him
I
fulfill
think-
the prophecy by bringing balance to the Force.
Right, like I think for me it was the Bounce Force also wasn't in the original trilogy. I think for me it was that thing of, but even in 5 and 6 when it is like, yeah, like you're Vader's son, it is less to me that like he's the prodigal son and more that he's basically a random person who's found out he has this larger kind of connection, but it's on kind of a duality of where he's at on the spectrum, right? Like where he is someone who kind of certainly in the episode 4 defines light, right? And his dad defines darkness in the first 2.5 movies, right? And it's on that kind of prism to give you that contrast and for him to bring his father back to the light, and less because like you are one of 1,000 generations of Skywalkers before us who've done this thing, right? Like it's more in giving us that full spectrum of the Star Wars like light and darkness kind of side of things. And again, I would also argue, for what it's worth, not to bring us back into the original trilogy again, but like the original trilogy, I would also say also already did the gray stuff a little bit better than this movie does. Like the original trilogy, I think, is pretty comfortable in the gray. Like especially Empire and even Jedi to an extent are pretty comfortable just like dance around like the gray areas of like what is, the difference between like the Jedi and what Obi-Wan and Yoda are trying to tell me to do versus what Vader wants me to do, and I'm forging a third path. Like Luke made his own option, right? Like he didn't kill his dad and he didn't join the Emperor. He did something different, right? Like again, we already got this. I think we already got this story. Like we already got this story in the original trilogy, and we're just getting it done again, just more condensed and not as good. Is sort of my beef with this arc. I guess that's just where I go back to again and again.
Any other favorite moments to highlight? One I want to give a shout out to is the we already talked about the throne room scene a little bit, so I won't dive into that one unless we want to.
It's
talk
excellent
about it.
though.
But
It's fantastic.
like the shot of Holdo going into Lightspeed into the Devastator is probably my favorite like sequence of anything Star Wars. I think it is incredibly like beautifully shot, and I remember when the movie came out, like theaters having to like put warnings up on the doors saying like there is no sound for a sequence in the movie. Like it's not that you're like, because people were thinking that the audio cut out in that sequence or whatever for the 8 seconds or whatever it happens. But I love that shot, and just like the military tactic of a kamikaze mission. And everybody's like, well, why don't they always do that then? I'm like, how much fucking money do you think those cruisers cost? Like, that is not a cheap tactic. That is this is your last resort kind of tactic that you would do this.
And it requires a massive amount of fuel to do it. That was part of her entire plan, was like siphoning from the other ships piece by piece until she got enough.
No, I mean her going into the Lightspeed into those other ships was not her plan.
That was an
that
audible.
that was
yeah.
a exactly.
Oh, that's true.
That is a
'Cause-
shit. They know that they're escaping. I have to do something.
That's right.
We
were right,
we
you were
had
right.
we had enough for one more light speed jump, so I'm gonna use the remaining what I've got.
That makes sense. Yeah, sorry. I mean, I just watched it today. I should have been more keen on that. My apologies. For some reason, I thought I was like, and that's why when you said that, I was like, and that's why she was siphoning the fuel to make it more of an explicit. And then you're like, no, it's an audible. I totally messed up on that. My bad.
Yeah, unfortunately, her plan and all her decisions through most of this just kind of make like no sense. Or just like not great.
I disagree with that. I fundamentally disagree with that, and that's one I've had many conversations with Cameron about, because I remember Cameron originally was like, why does she keep Poe in the dark? And I'm like, because Leia just demoted Poe, because the whole part of the beginning of the movie is Poe doesn't follow orders. He goes rogue. He goes AWOL, basically. And because of his recklessness, a shit ton of people die, and they're down, half their fleet, really, like at that point. So, like, keeping Poe in the dark is not the game plan. And it's like, we as an audience are conditioned to want to side with Poe in that, because we loved him in the first movie. We love Oscar Isaac, but like, especially in the grander scheme, or in the grander like conversation of like there's like an inherent misogyny in, like, if it was Admiral Akbar making this plan or something, like the fandom would have been like all behind it. But because it's a new character we don't know, and Laura Dern, a female character, like commanding a character that we love and keeping him out of things, like there's an innate resistance in that like theoretically you kind of have to push past if you want to empathize or sympathize with like Holdo's character. So I mean, Holdo's plan is always get to Crate. Like we can't jump because they'll track us, so we have to get to Crate, and then we will like sneak away while the ship continues on, and hopefully we can get down to this base, get our message out to the rest of the galaxy, and get reinforcements before the First Order knows like that the ship we're on no longer has people on it. And
which there's
and so there's like a lot of elements that are at play as to, and especially because like they don't necessarily know how the tracking is happening, especially because that whole thing happens with Finn and Rose. So like there's another argument to be made of Holdo could think there's like a traitor in their midst that is helping relay the position or something like that. So you got to keep that close to the vest. You got to keep those plans close to the vest.
Which would have been a really great
upset they didn't do something like that. Because there being a traitor in the Resistance would have been a much better plot device, no matter who it was. Like, and that's why like they set up this whole thing of like I got to play it close to the chest, and I don't know who's all like. It's just like there's just a lot that I think could have been better and more smoothed out, where like she's just like keeping everybody in the dark with these random plans. We don't ever get a clear understanding of what her plan is, and then the plan itself does change.
Yeah.
And it's also this thing of like and then also like the First Order is like 12 steps ahead of the game this entire time, which is like where they're like, oh well, we're doing the decloaking scan, and we are already ahead of them, and we know where they are. And then even when like they get sold out and they know the plan, it's like they just start blowing up the ships they sent out. It's like they're like the whole time I just feel like there could have been so much a better plan, or so much more they could have tried to do. And honestly, I wish they would have done the traitor thing. I was literally thinking that during the movie I wish there was a traitor that the First Order had planted.
Before we get into this, I do need to echo something that Trevor mentioned earlier, because we are still talking about things we liked about the film. And the last thing I want to end on with that is I agree with Trevor. My theater didn't have that warning about the 8 seconds.
Mine didn't either.
But
I mean, mine didn't when I went and saw it. I'm saying like after the fact.
Oh, later on?
I saw news stories basically saying like theaters are, informing people.
People are stupid. They don't understand movies.
No,
they don't understand the impact the silence has on the moment.
I have never, and I told Trevor number one thing I walked to this movie thinking is I've never lost my breath in a movie before. I've never literally had my breath taken away from me than I did in that moment. That silence, the piercing through this entire moment in this film. To this day, I cannot think of another moment in my life where that has happened to me. That effect has occurred to me, where literally I was out of breath because it had taken it away from me. This gasp that I felt in a silent movie theater, surrounded by dozens of people, like having that moment to me is still like one of the most awesome things ever. And even watching it on my screen, the downside of my watching it on my phone is that I watch so much TikTok that I've literally burnt the UI from TikTok into my screen. And so when that happened, I was reminded that like, oh yeah, TikTok's a thing, because they showed up when that happened. And it kind of ruined the moment for me this most recent watch, but I still think about that moment sitting in that theater, my head reclined back, watching this happen as it's just so dark, quiet, empty. It's space. I'm there. I'm in that moment. And it's just like my breath was just like, I exhaled and I didn't take another breath. I was just blown away by it. So I really think that when, like, I cannot emphasize enough how much I loved that moment and how much I agree with Trevor about how well it was done. And like, but I really want to give emphasis to that scene because it's still, in my opinion, one of the greatest moments. Like what Trevor said, it's one of his favorites. I think it's fundamentally one of the greatest moments in the entire Star Wars saga, the way that it's done. And it's still like, it still blows me away. The idea behind it all. And like Trevor said, it's not just that it's expensive. It's like, you don't send a kamikaze fighter made up of like the most elaborate and expensive thing. It's also on top of it, it's a command ship. You don't kamikaze your command ship. You kamikaze like unnecessary freighters and things like that. So like, yeah, and people are like, why hasn't anybody ever thought of it before? It's like, because hyperspeed is a form of travel, not a weapon.
Yeah. So real quick, I just want to I want to close the loop on the Poe and Holdo stuff, because like as I said, Holdo's plan is to get to Crate and like let the ships go. The reason the First Order is able to be a step ahead and like run the decloaking thing is because when DJ tells them, because DJ overhears that conversation because Poe and Finn are like communicating in there, so DJ has that like knowledge to get out of things. So like, it's not that they were one step ahead of everything. Like the thing they're one step ahead of is that they've got this tech now that can track through hyperspace, and got them at the end of a string or whatever. Like everything from that, it's almost like our heroes basically like fuck up and help the First Order get those other ships away, and then it ends up just being very like fortunate that the one that all of our heroes are does not get blown out of the sky. But so that's, I just wanted to like it. It is almost like if our heroes didn't interfere by going off to Canto Blight and stuff.
Yes.
It's entirely possible that everybody that was on that ship would have gotten away, save Holdo, who decides to like stay behind and whatnot. Like, so it's like, it's another failing of our heroes that leads to getting to that point. Like if everybody had just kind of like followed orders and stayed behind, we wouldn't have had this Canto Blight thing, which ultimately might have changed how, Finn sees everything or whatever. I don't know. But that, I just wanted to like, I've seen so much like criticism and lambasting out there of like the plan or whatever. And so I just want to like defend Holdo's plan basically in this moment.
Yeah. Holdo's a great character.
I mean, you're going to open up the whole thing again. I mean,
well, no, but I just like, I have something, because I feel like I guess I maybe didn't explain it good enough, where it's like, I know it's not I know the fandom at large has a lot of problems with Holdo and Holdo's plan. I don't have as much of a problem with that. I know I have a little bit of a problem with it, but my point taking, I understand everything you're saying, and you're totally correct, and that's what all that's in the movie, and that is everything. And if they did just stay on the ship and all followed Holdo's plan as like she set it out, it would have worked out better, and everything would have went along smoother. My point, taking another one or two steps back from that, is I just wish the movie didn't do like most of this, and we just got a completely different setup that had a better plan. Or you could have even like, why is also the movie I don't have a problem with her keeping Poe in the dark. Why does it keep us in the dark? Like she could have had a conversation with somebody that's like a trusted advisor, or she could have looked at a map or like some kind of schematic or something. Like there could have been something that gives us more leeway into like her plans. But also my main point is backing up. Like I just wish the movie did everything that they do with like a lot of those elements just differently, or it didn't have them at all and changed them. but then using what the movie has, I just wish there's even small things they could have done to just make it like, I don't know, like better, more enjoyable for me at least.
I mean, I get that, and like my argument would be
yeah.
the same as my argument for Logan's point earlier of like, why don't we see that moment
Hey.
where Luke makes the decision to go fight? It's because
Yeah.
having Luke suddenly show up where we as an audience don't know that he's force projecting. We think maybe he got off, like that would have been given away if we saw him make the decision earlier in the movie. Like it wouldn't be a surprise. It wouldn't be a wow factor in the same way. And I don't know if there's like an equivalent moment of like it would have hurt a story beat or a reveal or something like that if we had seen Holdo. But I also think it is playing into that idea of like we're supposed like we love Poe. We love what Oscar Isaac brings to the table. So we're supposed to relate with him and see Holdo as a little bit of an antagonist in the same way that Poe does. And it's really it's for Poe's arc that we don't see some of those things because Poe has to come around to the realization that she was right all along, which Leia helps him get to after like he wakes up and realizes that like everything has gone down after he got stunned. So it like all of that whole thing I think is feeding into his arc because he, much like Finn, like has a good arc where in that final battle he is like he has changed. He does call the fight off because we need to live to fight another day, as opposed to the beginning of the movie when like, no, we have an opportunity here. We need to take it. That was his mentality at the beginning. And by the end, he has come around more to Holdo's way of thinking of like, no, we need to be the spark that lights the fire that, you know, kicks these guys' ass in the next movie. Hopefully. So yeah, I think that's why we don't get those moments telegraphed to us. Both in Luke's story and in the Holdo scene here.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's...
Go ahead, Logan, and then we'll come to Cam.
I was just going to say, because I haven't really had anything on this, and I would simply argue that, like, I just think it's not done well. Like, I don't really have any beef with this, like, any part of it. Like, I think it's fine. Like, I don't have really any of the problems that people have with Holdo, like, and mainly because I love Laura Dern. And like I think the reveal's fine, all that stuff. I just think that like it's fine. Like I just think that like this to me is another example of like I think most of the elements of the film are fine. Like I don't think they're that great. In this case, I don't think it's like that bad, right? And I think like her plan, like I don't disagree with Frank that like there could have been some sort of a like an idea of what we're doing, because I think for me it can read at times that like she's not revealing that like her. I think the whole arc with her and Poe is just kind of because they need to just keep that arc going longer, because it's a 2.5 hour long film. They have like 3 storylines going at once, and so like how do we keep the tension before this one up when we're just like it's a slow car chase, and it's like, well, let's have the people on board fight with each other, and we're like it is what it is. I think that, you know, her actual plan is well thought out and solid, and it leads to Poe's arc, right? And his like growth and like, oh, like sometimes it's better not to risk everything for potential chance to win. But like, I mean, yeah, like it's fine, right? Like the bigger thing to me is that like it just sets up the money shot, like Trevor and Cam have spoken to, of, you know, the light speed into the ship, and that to me is sort of like it is basically Star Wars God of War moment for me, where it's like I like that moment a lot, I really do, but like the way people talk about it, the way Trevor talks about it, and like so many people, I'm like, I just don't get it on that same wavelength. Like I would never say that's like my favorite scene in all, like sequence in all of Star Wars, anything like that, right? Like I would list off a half dozen before that without even thinking. Like I think it is a great technical set piece. Like on that element of it, I agree 100%. Like, and like watching it in a theater, holy shit, it's a great moment. Like like it's all works in all those elements. But like, I think there are way more powerful like scenes I think of from Star Wars just from like Return of the Jedi alone.
Right, and it's and I don't think about any of those moments in Return of the Jedi. So it's, I mean, right, that's just like personal tastes.
Right, yeah, and so like that again, like God of War, it's like I like this thing a lot. I just don't, yeah, like to level up what people talk about. Like the scene is great, obviously. Like it is very clearly like the money shot of the movie is that moment, and like the lack of sound because it's in space. Yeah, like I mean, it is excellent. It is easily like the coolest set piece in the film, probably.
Cam,
There's some stuff in credits that's pretty dope.
Cool.
real quick, and then I have one last little bit on this, and then we can move on to a different moment.
How do I put it?
And you've had plenty of time, so
Yeah, no. I'm thinking because you want to transition to talking about more moments. I was going to transition into talking about the fundamental problems I have with the film, and so I'm thinking I might want to reserve that.
Okay, then let me give my final bit on this.
Yep, go for it.
Because I mean, to the broader conversation of Logan saying like, I think the Holdo stuff is fine. I think it is very deliberate, and it is a meta commentary on the fact that it is like questioning Laura Dern because of like this inherent misogyny that we're supposed to examine. That's my takeaway from it, which is an element that I don't associate with Star Wars. It opens up a conversation that I'm not used to having on a broader scale because Star Wars is telling it in this manner, which is why I'm so passionate about it in this conversation, obviously. And if that's just something that I'm pulling on it, that's fine. But I do think it is a very deliberate storytelling subplot to this film that is not that is meant to kind of force us to examine those inherent biases. And that's my takeaway on that sequence.
I've never fully agreed with that take, but I've also understood where people are coming from on it, and I respect it. And honestly, I think that it brings up, even if it's not the intended purpose, I think it starts a very good conversation either way.
Yeah, 100%.
Right, like I would say sort of, like exactly that, and just say that like I think for me, I mean, I can only speak for myself, obviously, but I think like I don't have any issue with the Laura Dern not telling Poe to begin with, but like for people who do, I think the counter would be, I don't dislike it because it's Laura Dern, a woman, telling Poe what to do. I don't like it because I'm not getting any information out of it, right? Like that would be the counter. That like the reason Poe and the audience would be upset is because they're not getting filled in the information, and the Laura Dern is going to say because you're a hothead, you're a pilot, all that kind of stuff. But we have Poe as our central point of view on this, obviously, and he's just saying, I'm not getting any information. We don't have a plan. I'm going to make a plan, right? I don't have any problem with either thing in terms of what Laura Dern does, but that to me would be like the other counter to
I think a solid point about it is that that if it is intended to do that, it's kind of like an entrapment moment then. Like the film sets it up that we are supposed to like. And I think it's like, this is part of Poe's arc, sure. But when you set up the film and you frame it in a way that is, we're supposed to support Poe, he's one of our heroes, and there is some shifty stuff going on that may not be as clear as we think, and there might be some more subterfuge and sabotage here. Like, you get that, and then it's like, nope, it's just because you're a misogynist. And it's like, I understand. Like, I looked at it like that.
I don't mean to say like you're misogynist if you think this. I just think it is. No. It is supposed to like it. I think it is a very deliberate choice that Holdo is, or that the character that Poe is butting heads against is a female versus his male aesthetic, because I think we're supposed to examine. Would we have thought this if it was Admiral Akbar instead of that character? Like if it was Admiral Akbar making all the same decisions that Holdo makes because the fandom has a connection to that character, or because that character is a male Mon Calamari or whatever, like would we have the same reaction, or would we trust that they know what they're doing versus Poe, who is established as a hothead? Like, so that's what I'm saying is that.
And let me actually. Never mind. We'll get into that point later when I want to talk about things I didn't like about the film.
I see now.
I think that it's, like I said, I think it's valid. I think it's a good, like, it opens up a very good discussion regardless. And that's just really what like my main takeaway is. Like, it does feel a little
Yeah.
like a gotcha moment sometimes when people say, well, it's a meta commentary on the on the question of, because there is a massive question of misogyny in Star Wars. There's very few female characters in the original trilogy. In the sequel trilogy, what happens to your main female character by the third film, etc. We've talked about it in previous episodes.
She becomes trash.
Yeah. And so I think that that's a valid argument or not a valid thing to do. But I also understand where people are coming from, where they're just like, well, no, because the film tells us we're supposed to trust Poe. And it's a subversion of what your expectations are from the film as well. And this is also during an era where everybody was trying to subvert expectations in films, so it definitely didn't, I don't think, landed super well with a lot of people. But yeah, I digress. So
I think, I mean, like, in between Trevor and Cameron, right? Like, I think I would say that
I'm not on the opposite side. I was just making that point.
No, but like in between the two arguments you're making, I guess. Okay. But like, I would say that, like, I think for me, it's sort of like that question we'll never know, right, Trev? Where, yeah, like, do we not agree with Laura Dern because she's a woman? Do we not agree with her because she's new to us? Do we not agree because of all these things? Because, like, I would think that, like, a big element watching the movie is that, like, I always had, like, they're like, there's a 20% chance that, like, Laura Dern is the spy. Like, Laura Dern is the traitor, right? Like, it was always in the back of my mind.
And I kind of wish they just did that.
Because she's new to us, right? Like, so to me, if she was a new guy, I would still be like, are you the bad guy, right? Like, it's that kind of element of, like, are you the villain? And so that's why we're kind of not sure, right? And I think Rian Johnson very deliberately staged it to me in that reading of, like, you're not quite sure where her loyalties lie, and, like, what her intentions are until, like, the big reveal kind of thing, honestly. And so, like, I always viewed it in, like, that lens of, like, because she is so new to us, because she is, like,
same,
the only new character really that gets, like, that kind of moment of leadership position in the film, we're supposed to not quite be sure of the motivations of her. And because she is being cagey with information, right, because she is doing something different than the plan that Poe has, I think our natural inclination is to go, something's not right here, right? And what's not right is Poe's kind of, I think, gung-ho energy and wanting to plan and wanting to attack, right, that we see from the beginning of the film being drawn out. That's what we're trying to kind of learn here ourselves. But I think he's using that to subvert expectations of maybe she's the bad guy, maybe this new person we've ever met is the bad guy. And so I think that element plays a big role too. That, like, not just that she's a woman, but also that she's a brand new character as well. And so we don't have any sort of idea at all of who she is or what she is or what this character is going to kind of be doing in the film. And so I find it interesting in that way as well.
We are now at the same length as the movie, so we can probably,
it's going to be a 3-hour podcast.
Probably aim on wrapping things up, but I will give, let's make an aim for wrapping things up. So maybe do like a rapid fire of anything else we liked or anything we really just need to get off our chest about. Like, I really didn't like these moments. Frank, anything else from you?
One quick shout out. We did kind of touch on it before in one of the earlier segments, but I do love the scene where Kylo smashes the helmet in the elevator. Like, that scene was a scene I loved, and I like kind of like the scene before that where Snoke is kind of like messing with him and kind of like goading him into it, and it's kind of that thing where like Snoke wants to be this new Palpatine, and he just wants this new version of Vader. And he's like, even kind of breaks it down for him. He's like, you're not Vader. And then that's when and he just kind of like, I love he just smashes it in all those different pieces. And no future spoilers, but to your point, when they re-weld it back together, even as soon as you see it in the trailer, I'm like, God, fuck. Like, it's just, but we'll get there when we get there. But that's just the one I wanted, because I think it's a great scene. And I think it is just a great, even like, I can't think of the right words for that, but it's just kind of a great, like, cinematography, or like, it's a great visual for so much of what's going on, is what I'm trying to say there. And then on the flip side, something I didn't like that is just kind of in general is Snoke. Like, he could have been somebody that could have been way cooler. He doesn't even get a backstory like in the movies. Like, he has one, but it is not in these movies.
It doesn't matter. He's a bad Emperor clone. Don't worry about it.
Well, and that's basically what it is. And it's just like, but it's like there could have been so much better with him, and I was excited for more with him. And I kind of like what they do with subverting it, where Kylo kills him and is like, I'm gonna become control, or I'm gonna take control. And but then again, like that even goes nowhere. So it's like this whole kind of thing of like so that's one thing I would say on one thing I like, and one thing I don't like is kind of Snoke and what they do with him here.
Mm-hmm. Logan?
I mean, I'll throw it to Cam because I'm sure Cam's gonna have a whole monologue. If you want to go with what you don't like or do like one more time, Cam.
Sure. I will say this: as much as I love and adore what Rian Johnson did with the Jedi and the Jedi B plot in this, the main crux of Crisis in this film is the chase, and I think it is the chase and everything related to it. I consider what happens on that other planet, Kendo Blight, right? Yeah,
Close
Kendo
enough,
Blight.
Canto Blight, yeah.
Yeah, what happens on Kendo Blight is an extension of
Close
that.
enough.
This entire and it is frustrating to see so little is done around and about it besides Poe's character. Like, I don't like where Rian Johnson took Poe's character at the beginning of this film. Because when we're introduced to Poe, we see that Poe, in the first film, that we see Poe prioritizes the mission more than anything else. He knows the importance of following orders and being told, you have your mission, you have your orders, follow it through. It's not until his X-Wing is unable to fly and take off that he then does what he has to do to try to distract them from BB-8 getting away. This very much seems like he has a cool, and he feels like in the first film, he has more of a cool hand than a hot head. And the beginning of this film, it starts off with him being like, hey, I have a plan. We have to do what we have to do to buy some time. Let's try to do whatever we can. Play a cool hand here, and there we go. And it's not until, this thing's a fleet destroyer. We got to take it out. Even though there's a bunch of other kinds of ships out there, it feels like a weird switch moment that doesn't fall in line with what I felt like the character was before. Then his X-Wing blows up and he is demoted, and they do these things to basically now his actions that led up to it are justified by the punishment he gets and being sidelined from the planning by the other generals and leaders. Because right before Leia gets comaed off, which is possibly one of the worst decisions in hindsight to have happen, just because we don't get to use her more because of what happens in her passing. In hindsight, it's a bad idea, I think, but and I don't care for it. But in this time, it's it puts Poe in this position where it's a question of leadership and faith and trust in her plan and this person you don't know. Sarah, sorry, I'm trying to run through a lot of things here because we don't have a lot of time. But I feel like this entire set piece, which is supposed to be our central point of conflict and crisis, is relegated to the C plot, and is relegated to being this. Even though it's technically by the story structure, it is supposed to be the A plot. It is supposed to be the thing that we are worried about and concerned about, and our mind is on this entire time. It is given expositional, moments in the film to give us an update of where things are at with it, but it's never where our center of crisis is, our center of action is. Instead, it's on two other planets that also have time pass on them that feels weird about, we're supposed to feel like we're in crisis and peril, and they extended on this very long journey of where once again Rian Johnson doesn't understand how time works the same way J.J. Abrams doesn't understand how space works.
I mean, same way Lucas didn't understand how time worked, as we talked about in Empire, where
yes, same.
Luke is on Dagobah for who knows how long, while Han and Leia are hiding from the Empire for the same amount of time, getting to Bespin, all that stuff.
Yeah.
Time works weird in space.
Sure, but to my point though is that when. And this goes into kind of what happens with Poe and Finn as a whole in this trilogy starts here. the problems with what happens with Poe and Finn becoming such unimportant characters in this trilogy by the end of it, in regards to the in regards to where we start with them and how they are especially Finn. Finn's entire arc is it important for him to find a reason to fight for the Resistance and to be willing to sacrifice himself at the end of this film? Yes. Did he have to go to this completely other planet for this MacGuffin nonsense to find the guy? They don't find the guy who's the only person who could possibly be the guy to help them, but they find a random other guy that they're just happenstance thrown into a cell with. Like, there's so many things that are like happenstantial, getting to this point where we get to see an awesome moment of Finn fighting Phasma. She says scum, and he goes rebel scum. It's a badass moment for his character, and that's in my opinion, the last great moment we have with him in this trilogy. And it feels like these other two characters get sidelined to this over what really, and this is where I would have done things differently, have the conflict center around what's going on. Keeping it up the end of the line. This is also where we start to see Hux become a total joke. Hux was this monster in the first film.
I was going to say real quick. I was going to say I especially in the hindsight of you guys drawing the parallel to him as an alt-right last week, I fucking love that Hux is a dumb jackass at the beginning of this movie who doesn't get that Poe is joking with him, because the alt-right is fucking morons. So
yeah, sure, I agree with that.
I love
point.
that.
Sure.
So yeah, fuck a Hux and let him be an idiot.
I don't think.
And I
love
I like the humor of it.
The humor of it's great. I think it fits totally into the everything's all right here.
Mm-hmm.
How's it going for you? Like that kind of a moment. I think it plays into it super well.
It's Poe's intro in the last one of like, so who talks first? You talk, I talk.
Exactly. It fits super well within that, and I actually like that scene. The problem is that he becomes such a lazy villain. In that we're just going to keep him. We have the resources to keep going. Like, it would have been much more for him to be like Snoke, to be like, oh, so you're just going to keep him at the end of the line and keep pulling, and be like, no, we're actually going to start actually taking down these ships instead of just from a distance. Every time they leap and we follow them, we're going to incrementally move further in on them and start creating a even further tension that requires Poe and Finn to figure out, okay, is there a traitor? Who's the traitor? And also, I don't know, maybe this would have been a great moment to reveal that, hey, remember when like Kylo Ren was in like Poe's head in the last film and like really did a number there, and then they just kind of like let him go? Like this whole, like, they could have totally pulled a big thing on that again. They
didn't let him go. He escaped with Finn.
I know he didn't. I know he escaped with Finn. What I'm saying is that there could have been something more there. This is hypothetically speaking. Me, once again, the same way that Frank was talking about it earlier. This could have been done in a way to make it compelling and exciting, and instead, everything about Poe's storyline up until the Finn gets back into it is boring and like a mutiny because of paranoia and whatnot, which is legitimate, I guess, but doesn't ever feel compelling to me. And
you say boring, we just spent like 45 minutes talking about it. So I think we can.
I thought we were talking about the plan itself. I think the plan itself is a fine.
I mean, like it was the plan combined with Poe's whole arc. Like that's what we spent. We spent 45 minutes talking about. So I don't know if I would buy that it's boring so much as like you might not like it, but
I don't like it, and I find it very like it lacks a lot of compelling narrative moving it forward, other than it being we have to know what's going back on the ship because it's in peril. And it's supposed to be our A plot, and like it's set up to be the stage for our A plot, and it is relegated to the least amount of coverage, the least amount of time on it, and is filled with this like other stuff that I already talked about just like a couple minutes ago. So, like, I consider everything an extension on the B and like the A and C plot. The Jedi B plot is what I call the Jedi B plot.
Right. So in your mind, the A plot is the chase. The B plot is the Jedi stuff. And what's the C plot?
The Canto Blight stuff.
Canto Blight stuff? Okay. Yeah,
Get
I mean,
involved.
I would
So I would disagree
switch
with
the A
that.
and B plots for you. I think
Yeah, I agree.
the
But
Rey
where's the-
Kylo
where's the-
story is the A plot, and
Yeah.
I
while
feel like
while the chase has like the momentum that kind of keeps things going, it's not the central focus as you've rightly identified. But it is
Oh, no,
it is the
Yeah.
thing that everything ties back to. But I don't think
say
that means it's the
narratively,
A plot.
I think narratively, that's what makes it the A plot, is that it is the central plot around everything is revolving around. Now, this is what I mentioned earlier when you brought up like what it all revolves around, what the film revolves around. The film revolves around this chase. Everything is taking
don't
place
agree to that,
around
I
this
think.
chase. Everything does. The film
with
starts with
Cam on
it.
this.
It's like it's
The
like
film
it's like the
starts-
window dressing, but it's not the main thrust of the film. I think
That's only
I-
because they don't pay
That's
enough
how I would
attention
describe
to it.
I mean,
it's the motivating factor and driving force for the majority of the conflict of the film.
It's
It's
not
the A plot.
It's not a plot centric story. I think is the larger thing. It is a story about character moments and sequences. But yes, that is the through line. But I think it is murky in the same way that like Rian Johnson is deconstructing everything. Like it's deconstructing what an A plot, B plot, C plot is. Is that
I don't think that's an intentional deconstruction. I think that he's spent so much time focused on the B plot that he lost track of the A and C plot.
and it's, I mean,
Totally agree.
it's.
I think the C. I think the C.
The problem
storyline's
is
fine.
like if you're calling the main arc of the story the B plot, then it's not really the B plot. Is from a narrative
Yeah.
stance. It is not the central action of the story, which is the chase, but that the central action and plot do not have to be the same one and the
Same
same
thing.
That's a
Heavily disagree with
that's a
I
whole
heavily
like
disagree with that.
okay
We're getting
okay
really
let's
deep
go
into, like, story-
let's
yeah,
go
like,
get our
storytelling.
masters in
Yeah, yeah,
screenwriting
yeah.
and debate it, Cameron. Fine, we'll like reach out to Ben Bellevue and see what the A plot and the B plot and the C plot of the film are, and then have fun with that because I'm sure he'll just talk your ear off about Last Jedi.
Yeah, I know. He'll tell me about how like Rian Johnson's a genius and how he's deconstructed filmmaking as an entire process. And anyway, I digress.
Anyway,
I love Ben to death, but like yeah, that's like his big thing for him.
any things you want to now that Cameron has kind of had some say there, Logan? Anything you
Yeah.
want to jump in? I've got a couple like final beats that I'll talk about.
Yeah, I was gonna say I drafted.
I have one
this
final
to
thing,
kind of
but
run
I'll
through
wait till
things
the end. It's fine.
we hadn't really talked about. Cameron kind of touched on it. Snoke, or not Cameron, Frank Snoke touched on it. Snoke, right? Like we didn't really talk that much about Snoke, but like,
Because he's pointless.
right? But like, I like the fact that Snoke dies, and I think and when I first watched it, I was kind of like shocked by that and like kind of thrown off by that a little bit. But then I was like, that's dope, that's cool, right? Because again, for me, it fed into the idea that Kylo Ren is going to be the main bad guy, which I thought was awesome. And they don't commit to it, obviously, but like
Yeah.
it fed into that idea. And again,
It's what if
fed into
Vader
the idea
killed
that,
the
like-
Emperor in Episode 5 instead of
We're
continuing
doing-
to be his pawn. or whatever.
Exactly. We're not going to do the original trilogy the same. It's like, to me, it's one of the things that they do very differently from the original trilogy, right? It's not like a retread like people accuse 7 and 8 of. Sometimes it's like, this is like a brand new thing. Like we're killing off the main bad guy. It's actually going to be someone else. I think that's cool. I think it works for me. I think Snoke, the moments he does in the movie are still really good. And it helps feed into making that death even more shocking. And like we talked about, the then fight scene afterwards is rad as shit. And one of the most like cinematically, I think, like attractive moments in the entire scene or entire film, is the lightsaber duel afterwards.
I put
so I wanna
Snoke's
give shout out to the
guards.
Snoke scene.
Snoke's guards are way cooler than the Knights
Yeah.
of Ren ever
Yeah,
have
hell
been
yeah,
or
yeah.
will be in the saga.
Facts.
Which is super unfortunate, but yeah.
I mean,
They had cooler weapons too.
it's like those guards end up being like what everybody thought the Knights of Ren was going to be, because the Knights of Ren have this name, and we saw like one shot of them in the movie in Force Awakens.
They're set up to be super awesome, and then they end up being really fucking lame.
That's a huge disappointment for me.
I don't know
out
if
of
they're
these
set up to be
sequel
super
movies.
awesome. They're set up to be like lieutenants to Ren. That's
That entire scene
Fett, man.
of the
Boba Fett.
There you go.
fucking
They're set up
flashback
to be
moment.
they're set up to be 7 Boba Fetts or whatever.
Yeah, basically
Yeah.
is what it. I mean, not even that. Like they're set up to be super awesome in that vision, and they look awesome as fuck,
Okay.
and they
They-
should be cool.
There are 7 Boba Fetts. Logan has nailed it. and Cameron is a dummy that just loves Boba
looking
Fett.
super cool. Yeah, they're set to
don't
be
say
looking
that.
super cool,
First
and then
off,
they're just
I don't
like,
appreciate being called a dummy who loves Boba Fett. I do not love Boba Fett.
You love Jango
I am a
Fett.
dummy. I'm a moron. Clearly, I love this franchise so much. I've learned so much about it. Of course, I'm a dummy.
I will say after the Snoke stuff, I like Canto Blight. We didn't really talk on it too much, but like I think it actually works for me. I've never really gotten that critique of people not liking it that much. I think it's fun. I agree with Trevor. Again, eat the rich. The other big, I think, oh, he just like flipped the table over from like J.J. Abrams stuff is that we haven't really talked about too much. Is I like the idea of Rey not having any special parents.
I agree.
They don't commit to it in the next movie. Obviously, like a lot of the decisions in this one. But I like it, and I also like the fact that like you can't buy into it, and a little bit like how we talked about how you don't know if you can believe what Vader said to Luke about "I'm your father." You're also the idea of like not being entirely sure if you can believe Kylo Ren, and I like that they play around with that same idea. And to be fair, like in Return of the Jedi, they have a scene explaining that, except for unlike Return of the Jedi, they have a scene saying, "Just kidding, actually, you have super important relatives."
Well, and they say, and they have like Kylo Ren be like, "I was telling you the truth. They were nobodies."
Because they chose to be nobodies.
Exactly.
We'll get into that next week.
Whatever.
I didn't want to bring that up because I figured we talk about it way more next week.
Yeah.
Oh, 100%.
But
yeah.
I thought it was a dope moment, and again, in the midst, it's a great cap to that great scene. One thing that I don't like that Cameron spent a lot of time talking about that I'll just kind of briefly touch on as well is I think the problems with like Finn and Poe and all the different characters are just because the character arcs for all the characters are kind of screwed up, which goes back into the idea of every director is doing his own thing with the characters and kind of starting them in different spots. And so, yeah, like Poe is a little bit different in this movie than he was for Force Awakens because that's what Rian Johnson wanted to use him as to get across that larger narrative point that he's trying to make for Poe about learning more responsibility and learning these leadership things. He needs him to undergo that arc, right? J.J. Abrams had him as a very different character in Force Awakens because that's what J.J. Abrams wanted him to do, and also because he was going to kill him off. And then we get a very different version of Poe in Rise of Skywalker because that's what that story needs, right? And the same thing for Finn and Rey and Kylo Ren, like because there is no central like this is how we want these characters to develop. Each director gets to do their own thing with them, and it works to varying degrees, right? Like Kylo and Rey get to be awesome in this movie. Finn, I think, suffers. I like Rose, and Poe kind of putzes around a lot in the movie, but gets like I think good stuff at the end of the movie once he does kind of get to the end of his arc. We didn't talk about it really at all. I think the Leia space scene sucks. I've never liked it. I don't enjoy it at all. I don't think it works.
I was going to bring it up
I know that Trevor doesn't,
as one of my final like little favorites.
I know Trevor disagrees with me on this. But like,
I fully understand where you're coming from.
Space Mary Poppins. I understand.
That's the very that's the meme version of it is Mary
very
Poppins.
glib. Yeah,
but I stand by, as I said when we talked about it the other night. Before coming out of that movie and seeing the internet shitting all over that moment, I loved that moment because it showed Leia as an incredibly powerful Jedi. and I still love it because it shows Leia as an incredibly powerful Jedi that we don't get to see anywhere else in the saga. And like I mean especially for what you're doing in that moment, like she is flying through space. Like any way that you shoot that is like people were gonna make fun of or do something of like, oh, she's Superman or oh, she's Mary Poppins. Like people would have memed it anyway because she's doing this impossible thing of flying through space to get back into the ship and survive. But I love that she has that moment, and it's again going back to what we talked about, and we've kind of touched on a couple times. Like I don't blame like the movie at all for not changing course following the passing of Carrie Fisher and saying like,
no,
maybe we could have killed her off there, or like, because Cameron, like you said, like in hindsight, don't put her in a coma for the entire movie. Like obviously, like
I said, that's in hindsight.
How do they, I mean, but like, I don't like in hindsight, like Episode 9 could have been something entirely different, and I always attest whenever Logan and I talk about it that like I imagine Leia would have survived the series. I don't think the saga was going to be kill Han off, kill Luke off, and then kill Leia off. Yeah. But we will talk much more next week about how like I hate the fact that they end up writing the story around whatever footage they had of Leia lying around from deleted scenes and unused footage in the like that is an incredibly bad like jumping off point as a storytelling thing. So like we'll talk about that at length next week as well, I'm sure. But I just want to, in response to Logan crapping on that moment, I love that moment, but I get why people don't like it.
No, I think it's set up my problem with it is that it's set up and explained poorly in the film, but then we get a really cool explanation in the next film. So, like, that's my feeling about it. I think the explanation is like, the
explanation that she'd been training with Luke. I mean, like,
who was Luke's first student?
I assumed that, like, from the get go of this. Like, I assumed I didn't think that Leia spent the time between Return of the Jedi and Force Awakens never using her force powers or never like doing anything Jedi stuff. Like
I did because I didn't like we had no.
I 100% did.
Yeah, when they decided they wanted to blow up the EU. One of the things I thought we were going to lose was Leia's Jedi training. And we were never given any indication that they weren't dismissing that.
That's my thing, yeah.
And it wasn't until this moment where it's like, oh, but then they don't say like Luke doesn't ever say if she had said, well, I understand like your first student like going evil is a bad thing, and him being like, my first student never went evil. My first student was Leia. She was awesome. That's what made me think I could do it with everybody, or like something like there could have been so much done to basically be like, no, Leia was trained. Like, this isn't just some random thing that happens out of nowhere to be a Deus Ex thing that is bullshit.
But, yeah, I guess we just had different assumptions on what happened in between that, and yeah, they will eventually show us an explanation for it. But
I love that scene in the next movie.
Logan,
we'll talk about it next week.
I think that yes, I don't like it, but it's it is what it is. I don't really care that much to go on to it. It doesn't work for me. But it does feed into how Cameron just kind of touched on how they explain it. Goes into my next point, which is like, again, Star Wars isn't great about history, and in that sense, is Luke waited a ridiculously long amount of time before he started training people, and it doesn't make any sense. And that's part of the problem with Luke's story when it feeds into Kylo Ren, is that like his first time training people, really not kind of Leia, because they explain the next movie, whatever, fine, but like first time training people is in the year like 20, it's like 25 years after episode 6 ends. That doesn't make any sense. That doesn't make any sense in time. Like, Luke wouldn't have waited a quarter of a century before he starts training the class. Like, it's like, because it's like the year 26 BBY or whatever, or like ABY.
That's when he goes into exile.
Something like that.
I don't know how long he was training Kylo and his class of Jedi prior to that.
It sounds like it hasn't been that long, is like the context I get. It's only been like a year or
so.
It's
only been 6 years since Kylo butchered the Jedi with the Knights of Ren.
Yeah, and Kylo is not that old, right? And this is my thing too, right? So like I always did like it hasn't been that long.
Kylo's in his like late 20s.
I mean, is he? Or is he just Adam Driver's late 20s, right?
No, because like,
Ben Solo was born 5 ABY. And so we're now in 35 ABY. So he's 30 by this? I mean, okay.
Yeah, he's like 30. Like,
and see, that's again, they make, and also like again, we're using all this stuff from like Wikipedia, and they're not explaining it in the film, obviously, but like it doesn't make any sense that certainly Luke waited, I would say, decades before he started training a Jedi class, and that doesn't make any sense.
But we know that's not the case.
That's just like a nitpick. We do know that's the case.
No, we know that's not the case because he picks up Grogu in.
But that's something that they don't explain in the movies. Folks. That's something that they're making in the Mandalorian to make. That's them Rogue One to make the sequel trilogy better. Basically, that's not like a thing that they do in the sequel trilogy itself.
Right,
like that's my problem with that.
According to Wikipedia, which again now Mandalorian might be screwing this. Yeah. Wikipedia says Luke Skywalker restores the Jedi Order in 15 ABY, so about 20 years before the events of this movie. And what 10 years after the fall of the second Death Star.
So that's an even better point then. That feeds into, again, this is like a really nitpicky point that I'm going to make out of a mountain out of now. That's an even better point. Then it doesn't make any sense that Luke is the only Jedi by the time this movie takes place. It's basically my logical
Yeah.
point, because if he had been started by 15 ABY, there'd have been 20 years for him to train, or like certainly a decade for him to train to class.
So that's
right?
also
like, that's
when he
my-
starts training Ben. So like all
Sure,
that's happening,
but,
and
like,
Ben
that
kills
means that
all
he
of his
would've
other
trained
students.
a decade later, right? Like I don't believe that like all of his students would still be in the same spot a decade later. Like some of them would have left and done other shit. And like that's like the problem, is that like Star Wars, like this is the problem when you try to do like they're all dead, and it's like, all right, cool, but like
Yeah, but at the same time, that's the same
very
thing.
well.
That's the same
So-
problem with when they've created like they did an expanded universe around, the original trilogy. Is that we found out, there were other Jedi that survived the Purge. They went into
that's
hiding.
the worst part of the expanded universe for the original trilogy. I always thought is that it weakens that storyline.
Fair, but they did it anyway, but they did that also with the prequels. In the
exactly.
prequels, they're like, other Jedi survived the Purge in the prequels.
Again, I think I agree. I just think it weakens that storyline, right? Again, this is just mainly a point to me to say Star Wars doesn't understand its history very well. It
That's
just
fair.
make one less swing at that. The other thing I wanted to say that we haven't really touched on at all, but it's actually one of the things I really love is the actual Kylo Luke fight at the end of the movie.
Yeah.
I think it's beautifully shot. I cannot stress that enough. It is like a gorgeously shot scene. I love the like salt, like red sand kind of thing. The fact that Luke never like attacks, he's just doing defensive stuff. Again, feeding back in, I think, really well. A nice thing I like that they tied into the original trilogy to how he defeats Vader, how he defeats Kylo is again not attacking, using like a pacifist approach.
Even with
I think
Rey
it's super cool.
earlier when they fight, he never attacks. He defends himself, and there is like contact because he can't always dodge out of the way.
You
but
caught that. Trevor caught it.
yeah, he never fights back.
And so I loved that whole scene. Obviously, the dialogue I think is really well done there. Like the conversations they're having, how he like reframes the everything you just said is completely wrong, and then leads into like the rebellion is born again this day, like all the Jedi is born again, like all that stuff. I think is so well done. The musical swell as it kind of reveals what's happened, and that like the rebellion is going to be stronger than ever after this legendary moment, right? And then again, one of the things I've always liked about Ben or Kylo is he is such a right. If like Vader is like cool fury, right? Ben is like a hot, fiery passion in his like usage of the dark side. And again, seeing that in, keep firing on Luke, and then seeing it in his like fighting style against Luke with like him like sliding around and missing and just swirling around like unhinged almost. I love seeing Ben fight because I think it's a really cool juxtaposition with how Vader always fought in the original trilogy of like much more calm, cool, and collected, and kind of this like fury within him versus Ben kind of running hot. So I thought that final scene was great. And then the last little note I had just kind of touch on is something that Trevor and Cameron disagreed on. I like General Hux in this movie. This is the last General Hux that I think is good. I think they ruin him, not in this movie, but in the next movie. I think is where he becomes like too much of like a parody cartoon inept figure. I think this movie is like the right balance of like him being an actual person, and again, feeding into something we talked about in the last movie. He's not Grand Moff Tarkin, right? Like he is that pale image of Grand Moff Tarkin who isn't as put together and who isn't as confident and who does kind of get undercut. Right, and whereas Grand Moff Tarkin ultimately had like the greater authority than Vader, here you see that ultimately when push comes to shove, Kylo Ren has the greater authority than Hux, and so I really like General Hux in this movie, and him kind of being the voice of reason at times with Kylo Ren, like when he's just shooting constantly and saying, "I think he got him," right? Like I think his character works really well for me here. Was the last little note I had.
Cool. I want to try and wrap us up sooner than later because there's a storm brewing outside. I don't know if you guys can hear the thunder and stuff in my
I'm hearing it from my end of
yeah,
things.
Cameron hears it here. So I don't.
It's also like 11:20.
I'm now terrified
Yeah.
that like power is going to go out and we're going to lose the entire episode.
Yeah, it's getting real loud.
But yes, I was going to say the final fight is phenomenal. I love everything about it, and so I was gonna that was gonna be my last little shout out. Cam, you had like one last thing you wanted to do. Can we make it quick?
Yeah, the Space Horses most assuredly have trackers on them, and so after they're like, we got him set free.
This is
those
such a
guys
fucking
definitely
worthless
picked him
point.
up the next morning.
This is such a
100%.
fucking worthless final beat. Like, why the hell?
The freeing
don't
the
waste my
horses
time.
was pointless.
Let's move on to the.
Don't waste my time freeing the horses. Then
moving on to the report card. Frank, what do you want to give episode 8? A+ to F.
Oh man, yeah, this is kind of a tougher one for me. I think I am gonna go B-. I think C+ is a little bit too harsh for this because again, like there's parts of the movie I don't like, and like I think we've highlighted a lot of them. And even though like there's just a lot of things I'm like I just wish they did the entire movie differently, or not the entire, but a lot of it. But I think like anything C is probably too harsh, so I'm gonna go low B.
Cool, Cameron.
I'm gonna give it. I'm kind of leaning towards Frank on this, but I think I'm actually gonna give it that up just because of a lot of other things. Yeah, it's a B for me. I think that it is, like I said, it cuts down the middle to the bone for me on this film because I spend a good chunk of time just now trashing this plot of this film and everything, but I still at the end of this I was super positive about it. This is how I feel about the movie. It is a good film in spite of several things that I've mentioned. So saying that, I think I'm going to give it a B.
Okay.
I agree.
As I think I've made no bones about, like, I love this movie. I have a great time with it. It gets an A+ for me, up there alongside Empire.
Oh wow!
I know that is.
I knew,
especially with this group, and outside of the norm philosophy. But yeah, I love this one. I love the story it's telling and visuals and how it tells that story. Again, I have my own issues with certain beats and stuff like that and some stupid things, and I won't defend certain elements, but I really have a good time with it. Logan.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a tough one. I'm sort of in a similar vein with Frank and Cam in terms of like bouncing back around. I think this movie, like I told Trevor, was the first one where I left the theater and was like, I don't really feel anything out of it, right? Like I don't feel stoked and jazzed. I just kind of feel like I'm not sure about that. And watching it again, for the first time since in a couple days ago, I felt, a bit more at the end of the movie because I think that it does end somewhat strong. But like, I mean, this to me is like right on the thresh, like the knife's edge of like a B- to a C+ for me. Because what I think, certainly at the very least, I will say only for myself, has been a divisive topic. What I think is the main thrust of the story, which is like the Luke, Kylo, Rey stuff. I obviously have some pretty big issues with like the Luke side of that. And then just otherwise, like I think the first and second act drag at times for me. Like I think it's not very. I think exciting is like a really trite whatever thing to say, but like it just doesn't do it for me at times. I'll probably ultimately say a B-, if only because that's what I gave episode 3, and so now I've kind of put myself in between like a rock and a hard place on that. So I'll say a B-, right? And then in terms of like where I rank it, which is where we go next from here, I again am like right in between. Like certainly for me, like there is a big drop off after the original trilogy in episode 7, and then it is like 3 and 8 are kind of battling back and forth between like 5 and 6 for me. And in terms of like which one I'd rank high, which one I'd rank lower, I'm not quite sure.
Before we rank one last, like, I love this moment that I wanted to highlight, even though it's really fucking dumb, there is an element of it that is really fucking dumb, is the Luke and Leia scene, in the lead up to the fight. Even though the dice is really dumb 100%. And whatever, like
it's stupid, but who cares?
Especially knowing that we wouldn't end up getting another sequence between them in Rise of Skywalker.
I'm glad they got a scene
together. It's incredibly just for like the two human
beings. Yeah,
that they got one last little bit on time. So in the rankings, currently we are number 7, Attack of the Clones. Number 6, The Phantom Menace. Number 5, Revenge of the Sith. Number 4, right in the middle there, Force Awakens. And then number 3, 2, and 1 are A New Hope, Empire Strikes Back, and Return of the Jedi, respectively. So I know I'm going to be higher than anybody else on this, so we'll kind of throw my stuff out the window. But is there anybody that wants to make a case putting this below any of the prequels?
No.
It's tough for me, right? Like I don't like like part of the problem is, like I
Wait,
said, like
any of the
I-
prequels, not just. I thought you meant like at the
sorry,
very bottom.
sorry. So, like
no,
no,
like any of them. It's better than any of them.
Is like do we start the
worse,
ranking at this above Revenge of the Sith, or does somebody want to make the case that Revenge of the Sith is better than this one?
That's the thing for me that I'm not sure about, right? Like I think I really enjoyed it as a companion piece to Revenge of the Sith in some ways, because I think they're both flawed movies that I enjoy parts of, right? Like there are chunks of Revenge of the Sith that I really like, and then there are chunks that I really do not like the Yoda Palpatine scene. And then there are chunks here that I like, and there are chunks that I do not like, right? Like the Luke stuff. And so I think they each kind of have that element for me, and it seems like Frank as well. So I'm not sure. I've been going back and forth this whole podcast. We've been going stuff we like and don't like. So I could go either way on that, I think.
Okay,
I do agree.
Then let me start in a different fashion, and then we'll maybe come back to this. Does anybody apart from me want to make a case that this is better than any of the original trilogy, or are you guys like?
No.
So it won't crack the top 3.
No.
Period. Cool. So then it comes down
I
to.
am curious where you would rank it, though, Trevor.
I mean, because I don't have the love for Return of the Jedi that you do, I wouldn't have put Return of the Jedi number 1. But for like in my personal ranking, it is my favorite of the Skywalker Saga.
Really?
I do that. So.
I would put it above Empire.
Oh,
Strikes
I didn't
Back.
know it was ahead of Emperor.
Yeah.
Really? That's great. Wow. I did not know that was gonna be number 1 for you.
Yep. So we have then
Really?
basically,
wow, that's nuts.
is it gonna go below Revenge of the Sith, below Force Awakens, or below New Hope? I don't imagine anybody's. Does anybody want to put it above Force Awakens apart from me?
No.
I don't.
Okay.
Look, I would. Here's the thing. Before last week, I would have said yes, but upon rewatching The Force Awakens after, like, it was the
Force
first time
Awakens is
watching
great.
it,
It's a ton
after
of
watching
fun.
it
Yeah.
after Rise of Skywalker, all the different context, everything that I talked about last week about like the lost potential of that film, I think just because the potential is lost doesn't mean that it didn't have that potential out of that film. So I would put it below Force Awakens, which is a weird thing because I didn't think I would have that opinion when we started.
For me, that's also kind of where it lands. Like I thought, I'm with Logan that this was kind of conflicting for me, and I did think about it a lot earlier before the show. Like while I was at work, I was kind of ranking, because originally after watching the movie, I had Revenge of the Sith above Last Jedi in terms of our like ranking, where I would put it like Force Awakens, Revenge of the Sith, Last Jedi. But I had like this thought in the afternoon though, where I realized that I actually disagreed with myself, and I changed my own mind where I would put it where it's The Force Awakens, Last Jedi, then the prequels. And the kind of the quick 1-sentence version of what my thought there is, what I realized is, to me, Revenge of the Sith is a more fun movie, and we had more fun watching it and talking about it, or at least in the conversation afterwards. Last Jedi is just a better movie. Like, it is a better filmed, better written. It has its problems. There's a lot of things I don't like in the movie, and I've said, like, I think about them with Cam, I just wish they did things differently sometimes. But it's just, that's the difference to me. It's like Revenge of the Sith is more fun, but this, if we're talking about like what is a better film, I think this is a better movie. And so that's kind of where I think I would come in.
Okay. Any other final thoughts, or I'll just kind of like, who thinks it is better than The Phantom Menace? Raise your hands.
Oh, I mean everyone, right?
Okay.
Personally, no, but we've already discussed I rank the Phantom Menace much
okay.
higher than others do.
Okay.
So.
So
That will like skew the rankings a little bit though in some ways. So
yeah,
that'll be interesting.
Sure. So who thinks it then who? So it moves on beyond The Phantom Menace. So who thinks it is better than Revenge of the Sith?
I think ultimately I like Frank's description of it as like Revenge of the Sith might be a more fun movie, but this is probably a stronger movie overall.
Okay.
I think that was well said, Frank.
So and then Cam is kind of giving like the nod that maybe it's better than Revenge of the Sith, even though the rankings don't line
Oh
up
no,
with
no,
his own rankings.
I think it's
Yes.
better than Revenge of the Sith.
Okay, sorry, I'm looking at framing that might have had your hand off camera. Okay.
Oh yeah, no, it's okay. Oh,
So
sorry.
then,
about that.
so
Yeah,
then,
no,
who
I-
thinks it is better? So all of us think it's better than Revenge of the Sith, in part because of Frank's very eloquent like Revenge of the Sith might be more fun, but this is a better movie. Cool. So then, does anybody apart from me think it's better than The Force Awakens?
No.
Nope.
Now,
nope.
no.
Nope. Okay. So then it goes in at number 5, behind the original trilogy and behind The Force Awakens and above the prequel trilogy.
Wait,
Fucking, how is that difficult? like Force Awakens was.
No. I'm not disagreeing with you. I'm saying, wait. I just realized the most divisive film of the franchise
is smack dab in the middle.
Dead middle.
Yeah, I mean,
smack middle.
That does not surprise me at all. Really, like that is pretty much exactly where I expected it to go, knowing that I'm the one that was the hottest on it.
I knew where Trevor was going to go with it. I thought I knew where Logan was going with it. Turned out it was wrong. And then I didn't know where Frank was going to land on it at all. So, like, I was totally up in the air about where this could land. But thinking that it landed perfectly at 5 kind of blows my mind a little bit.
It's kind of perfect.
I think it's a fitting spot.
All right. Yeah. So the extra credit, if you like this, it's pretty much everything that we normally see. It is everything except in this case, Revenge of the Sith. So. This also says like screw Revenge of the Sith, and Mandalorian's in there in place of Revenge of the Sith. Anybody else watching anything else on Disney Plus? Real quick, I'll just say I finally finished DuckTales, and fucking that is a nearly flawless series. I loved it. It had a great it has a 3-part finale that I loved like every second of. Finished it and then immediately rewatched those 3 episodes. I was late recording one of our other podcasts because I was so engrossed in that story, and I forgot to reach out to Cameron. Fortunately, Cameron had also fallen asleep, so like we were both late to it. But I love DuckTales. The new series is just great, and I don't know if they'll ever revisit those characters or any of the spin-off stuff that they were playing around with, but it was a ton of fun and as a very fitting end to that series. And then. Because Loki wrapped up last week, so but I have definitely also just gone back and watched like the final episode of Loki a couple times because it has an incredible performance in it that I don't want to say to spoil anything, but I really loved it.
I'm 100% with you on all that though.
Yeah.
I haven't watched it yet, but watching Last Jedi, I saw one of the things I saw recommended in like the same field thing for me was like Star Wars biomes, which I've not seen, and so I'm excited to watch that too. I think.
I mean, you'll get to spend more time on Octo. It's like I did a D+ episode on that thing. It's like an 18-minute like weird little like it's just a weird little like almost like a touristy video of like come see the sights of Star Wars because it's just like flyover shots and stuff like that. It's a very weird thing, but go check out Star Wars biomes. Another thing I want to check out is the behind the rides, I think is what it's called, or behind the attractions or something. It's almost like a spiritual successor to the Imagineering story, where it's like let's talk to the Imagineers behind some of Disneyland's big rides, and let's go enjoy them. And I'm realizing everybody else is frozen on my screen, so maybe you can hear me, maybe you can't. I don't know. Hey there, internet friends. My internet crashed pretty much right as I was trying to outro the episode, so we ran into some kind of chaos and headaches there. So I wasn't able to outro with the rest of the crew. I recorded something on my end, they recorded something on their end, and I'm recording this because I imagine it's going to be way easier to just say this than try and edit everything together. But you can follow all of us over at That Nerdy Site. You can follow Cameron at Rev Cabot online. You can follow Frank at Irrelevant Jokes. You can follow Logan at Lefty Logie. You can follow me at Trevor J. Starkey. And shout out to all of our other podcasts and Let's Plays and everything that we do out there. Once again, if you liked what you heard for this whole 3-hour plus mess of a podcast, you can please like, rate, review, subscribe, share the podcast with your friends, all that fun stuff. And if you do feel so inclined, you can always support us on Patreon at patreon.com/thatnerdysite. Thank you for joining us. As always, stay nerdy, be good to each other, class dismissed, and may the Force be with you.